I'd like to call this meeting to order. We had a little bit of a delay because of a technical problem. My apologies. I wanted to also say before we got started that this meeting was postponed, I believe, last November because the room that there was supposed to be a conflict in this room on the 9th, which we normally would have had our meeting. So if that inconvenienced anyone, I apologize. It was posted on the 9th. I don't know if it was posted subsequently, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this decision was made, not by us, and it was a long time ago. I'd like to welcome all of you and call the meeting to order. Dr. Ring, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. In keeping with our commitment to make our mission statement each time, I will tell you our mission is to advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. We have the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion.
Second. All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay. Public comments. GP, you're first.
Madam Chair, I will take my time in a moment of silence to our brethren, Mr. Stephen Boyd, who was killed by APD on this date, James Boyd, on this date in 2014 by APD. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, GP. Mr. Perd, you're next.
Thank you. Seems I can't use the overhead, but I just thought I'd bring these tonight. These are all the lists of the murder victims from Albuquerque Police. As the language of the CASA is most confusing and the word stakeholder keeps popping up by the business community, APD Forward, APD officers, homeowners associations, and other groups, I can't get over the vanity of these people in these groups that think it's all about them. The word stakeholder really should be removed from the CASA. Everyone in the state of New Mexico is a stakeholder. And to the people that think that I and others are not viable entities in this matter, excuse me, but to hell with them. I am somebody. I hope that I can somehow be a voice for all the people murdered by Albuquerque police and law enforcement, and I hope I can bring justice to their murdered family members. DA Raul Torres continues to do nothing to APD or law enforcement, so Raul Torres should resign. As APD Forward and APD continue to mislead the public with the settlement agreement, the CPCs remain in a dysfunctional state. When I attended these CPC meetings at the first of the year, I stated to Selena Espinosa and Ms. Bustos and Nicole Chavez Lucero to have at these meetings available the manuals, the CPC manuals, so the public knows exactly how these function. And each and every time I have asked, I haven't received anything. I also asked Selena Espinosa for the new SOPs and the new use of force policy and lapel camera policy be distributed, hard copy on white paper to all the people at the meetings. In short, Selena keeps refusing to bring these documents and keeps stating that they are on the APD website and keeps saying, give me your email address and we'll get them to you. Can't get them. I would like to have printed copies at each of the meetings so that people know what's going on. Does she really understand plain English is my question. As long as there are no citizens on these boards or on the CPCs, APD will always remain in control and the public will never get over the fear of APD. Has this board received any response to Chief Eden, from Chief Eden about your inquiries? I understand you have numerous ones. But anyway, I'd like to know if you've heard from the chief at all about the numerous inquiries. Has APD responded favorably to any serious changes? Even though I come from outside city limits, so to speak, and this oversight board may not like the things I say sometimes, I'm here to help. Let me also thank this board for their time and their efforts. Please remove Chief Eden and the upper brass so the healing can begin in this city. Let's also get rid of the defunct Internal Affairs Department of APD. Let us get rid of the criminal element we call our public servants. I have examples of positive citizen oversight. Again, I'm here to help. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Perd. I will tell you that the item you mentioned about response from the chief will be covered in tonight's agenda. So the answer is yes. I think we want more than we got, but we did get a response. So you'll hear more about that at this meeting.
Okay, yeah, because I understand you had something like numerous amounts.
Yeah.
I'll just say over 40.
Over 50, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Mr. Jonathan Betts?
Good evening. My name is John Betts, and Ms. McDermott is, see, I thought she was with the Police Oversight Commission.
Miss who?
Ms. McDermott.
Miss McDermott is an investigator for the CPOA, the agency. So we're the governing board for that agency.
Okay, my issue, I'm a long talker, so I'll make it short. I had an individual run a stop sign on Morningside and Marquette 2 weeks ago and crashed into my car. I had called APD and they sent an officer over to investigate the accident. And after a simple discussion, this officer tells me, he says, do you have any guns on you, sir? And I said, beg your pardon? And he got kind of hostile and he said, do you have any arrest warrants for you? And I said, no, that I'm not aware of. So he grabbed me and turned me around and had me put my hands up and started actually kicking my legs, reached under my pants and grabbed me by my testicles. Forgive me for being direct. And as far as I'm concerned, this officer assaulted me. I've written a letter here to the mayor on this subject, which I gave him today. Mayor Berry, I was up in his office. It says, I am attending the meeting of the Police Oversight Commission to address several issues which I find every day on an ongoing basis. I read an article stating that you, Mayor Berry, do not attend public meetings, or perhaps this makes the citizens wonder what is happening in the great city to raise a family. Also, I observed a violent situation today at 4th and Roma involving APD, which has nothing to do with this direct incident, however. I have gotten the paperwork together to notify City of Albuquerque Risk Management. I intend to file an action against the police for assault and abuse again. And if you look me up in the computer, there's been a major case that I filed against the City of Albuquerque, which was found by a federal court of 12 counts in my favor for the activities of the Albuquerque Police Department. And I wrote down here, typical of a dangerous gang of thugs in the western United States, and I signed my name to it. I did go to Internal Affairs last week and was told by the security guard at the front office there at 400 Roma that there's nobody here, sir, to talk to you. And so I am not sure whether there is a police internal affairs investigation unit or not, and I will be asking the mayor about that. And so if you would like me to leave a copy of this letter with the commission, I will do that.
Sir, I would like to make sure that you know that you can file a complaint about this incident with the CPOA. That's why we're here. So the agency, which is at 600, it's in the Plaza del Sol building, 600 2nd Street, is that correct? And it's on the 8th floor. You can call in, and you can be anonymous if you want or not if you want, and tell us what happened to you, and we will investigate it. That's why we're here. So we would encourage you to do that if you are so inclined.
I will be. And
Okay.
I appreciate your time, and then I will contact
You can
your
use that
office.
letter in that complaint. You can give it to the investigator. That's the best place for it.
There.
Okay?
Okay, thank you again
All
for
right.
your time.
Thank you. Mr. Arison.
Yes, good evening. I don't want to step on what Mr. Perard had to say, but I believe if I heard the past chair of the board speak to the chief's reluctance in doing what he's supposed to do under the ordinance, and I've heard other members of the board repeat the same things. And I was curious as to why your independent attorney hasn't put together a complaint and filed it with the district attorney's office for criminal charges against the chief in municipal court for violations of the city ordinance. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, I see you're talking about amendments to the ordinance. There are 2 court cases that I believe the outcome of those cases should be placed into the ordinance as amendments. One of them had to do with the choice or the hiring of a executive director, that those interviews be open to the public, and that was done after we brought that to the board's attention when Director Harness was hired. And then the other one has to do with a federal court. I believe that case was a district court case. The other case has to do with a federal court case where there was a First Amendment rights violation, and I was a plaintiff in that case. And the outcome of that case concerns the time that the public has to speak here and the ability for 2 members to give their time to a 3rd member. You all stamping parking passes for the public and a few other things. There were concessions that were made, and I believe that those things should be added to the ordinance also as amendments. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, sir. Is there anyone else who didn't get a chance to sign up? Okay. Review and approval of the minutes. Michelle, thank you for getting these out to us so quickly, and I did not see any changes that were necessary. Did anybody else?
There's a couple of things that I looked at here on item number 11, the subcommittees.
Let me get there. Wait a second. Okay, reports from subcommittees.
Item number 5, under 11.
Number 5. Yes.
Says Director Harness. And part of what I wanted to add in that we talked about that isn't in the minutes, we had talked about when the CPO went out to do the presentation, it would be filmed, as we had talked about in our subcommittee meeting. That would be very beneficial for when we do our outreach committee meetings to open with the presentation of the CPOA. I'd wanted to see if we could maybe add those into the minutes because we talked about it, but they're not in the minutes. And the second thing was on item number 6, where it says, Member Amijo is confirmed with the Bernalillo County Commission. It's not the commission, it's Parks and Recreation Director. That's the only change on that one there. Those are the 2.
Michelle, did you get that?
Right. Yeah, when they do that, when the CPOA does their presentation, to have it be filmed. And then that way we can use that film when we go into the community for our outreach meetings. That's a nice opening to start the meetings with. The last thing, I'm sorry, there's one little tiny thing that I saw that was kind of different to me. At the very, very bottom of the last page, it says Civilian Police Oversight Board Minutes. You know what? That's my mistake. We're good. We're good. So those are the 2, Madam Chair.
Does anyone else have any corrections or additions? Can I have a motion, please,
A motion
to accept the
to
minutes?
accept the minutes?
Second? Somebody?
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Johnny.
Chair, fine. Is there any way we can fix the mics, because there's a lot of reverb?
Is there a lot of
That's all.
feedback on the mics?
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to say a point of clarification. Tony, you asked me this before. I wanted to let you know that Amanda Bustos is the outreach coordinator for the agency, the CPOA. So she doesn't represent the city or the CPCs or APD or DOJ or anybody else. She's an employee of the CPOA. Okay? I just want to make sure you knew that. Okay? All right. Okay. Counselor Davis's resolution regarding officer-involved shootings. Mr. Harness, are you the one that put this on the agenda?
Chair Fine, that's correct. It's scheduled to be in front of the City Council on Monday, the 20th, for a vote. And I thought that the board should review this and take a position before it is voted on by the City Council.
I did not have a chance to read it. Would you tell me what's in it that you find we should discuss? What parts of it are there that you think are important for us to discuss?
Well, the resolution would, I'm sorry, Chair Fine, the resolution is to remove the Albuquerque Police Department from the investigation of officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths.
In place of whom?
The proposal is either state police or Bernalillo County Sheriff would take the lead and be the lead investigative team over the multi-jurisdictional team that responds currently. So instead of APD being the lead of the investigation, it would be an outside agency.
Do you think that's wise?
Chair Fine, given the quality of the investigations that we've been reviewing, I think it is wise to remove APD from being the lead in their officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths.
So you think there would be an increase in quality of the investigation if it were handled by someone other than APD as the lead?
Chair Fine, I think it would add to a certain level of trust for the community, and I think that, I would hope that it would also improve the quality as well.
Okay. What are other board members? Yes.
Madam Chair and fellow board members, I don't agree. I don't agree with this. I don't agree with the councilor's resolution. I think
Move it back from
put it.
here. How about this one?
I don't agree. I think that it's in my opinion that it's reactive, and I think that APD should be an improvement in APD, and they should be given room or counsel or some way, a mechanism to improve the situation as it exists already within APD. I think that's I have hope, maybe I'm being a Pollyanna on it, but I really believe that APD should be responsible for making an improvement. I do agree that the investigations are not up to par, but I think that I personally do not agree with the resolution at this point.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Director Harness, what does Sheriff think about this? Has this been talked about with the Sheriff's Department, with Mr. Gonzalez?
Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, when this was presented to the Finance and Government Subcommittee of the City Council, the chief of the state police was there, and he is against this resolution. He stated a lack of manpower and a lack of funding in order to facilitate this type of an operation.
But the sheriff has it.
Board Member, Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, I'm not aware of the sheriff taking a position.
It kind of doesn't make sense to pass a resolution if the sheriff is going to be in the same position that the state is in regards to manpower, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's hear from the rest of the board members.
Yes, sir. Director Harness, Section 3. It would appear that if this resolution passes, every officer involved shooting and every in-custody death requires a special prosecutor. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but can you try to interpret that to us?
Chair Fine, Board Member Ring, this is Councilor Davis's resolution, so I wouldn't try to interpret it beyond what it says in the resolution.
Chairperson Fine, I also have trouble with the resolution in that I think APD is working hard to meet new standards, and we really don't have, or I don't have, a real idea about the standards of the other two agencies. So I feel that I can't support this without more information.
Eric?
No, I concur. I'm more worried about the manpower obligation we're placing on other agencies, and also how much is it going to cost us to either fund this effort or have them fund it for us. I don't feel comfortable on putting our burden on someone else when we should be taking care of our own business.
My own thoughts are, is that even if it was sustainable now, would it be sustainable in the future? If you have something that's malfunctioning, giving a reason for them not to fix that malfunction, it doesn't make sense to me. I would like to hear, Major Tyler, if you have anything you'd like to add to this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair Fine and members of the board. From our perspective, we believe it is our responsibility to continue handling our own investigations. As you all know, as stated within the CASA, we do this within the metropolitan, I'm blanking out on the acronym for it, but the MOU that was developed for the multi-agency task force. So there is shared responsibility already between the major entities of law enforcement within the state. So that's shared by state police, Rio Rancho PD, the Sheriff's Department, and ourselves. Whenever there's an officer-involved shooting involving either the Sheriff's Department or APD, that entity will take the lead of the investigation with the help and oversight of the other entities I mentioned. So we feel that that is the best way to do it. We feel that's in accordance with what's required of the CASA as well as the MOU. And we do not agree with the resolution, again, because we don't feel it's fair to task other agencies. The resolution also does not state who would take on those investigations. So you could end up having a very small agency that has no training in this type of investigations, taking over the investigations, and I don't think that would do the investigations justice.
Would you like to speak at all about the quality of the investigations and the work that you're doing now that you're over that part in terms of the quality of the investigation? Because I think what you're hearing is some concern about the quality of the investigations as they exist now.
So I feel the quality of the investigations themselves have always been at a very high level. I think the way the investigations have been documented can stand for some improvement. We've currently just recently met with, and this is both on the criminal side and the administrative side. So you have to think of the investigation in two portions as well. The criminal side of the investigations, we just recently met with the DA's office, and they gave us some feedback on how they'd like to see some changes made to the reporting process of the investigations. I think that will go a long way as to showing that the quality of the investigation is then articulated in a much better fashion with the case that's are then submitted to the DA's office. As well as internally, we're doing a lot of work the same way of restructuring the summarization of officer statements versus utilizing just the transcripts of that investigation, and so we are making strides to improve the documentation of the investigations.
I would assume, and check me on this because we know what assumptions can do, I would assume that there's a check and balance in the multi-agency task force in the way that that's set up. I would assume there's a check and balance in terms of our input on cases when we say that we think, a case was handled or could have been handled better. The DA, you just mentioned the DA. That would be another way that you would get feedback on the quality of the investigation. What other ways are there that I'm not thinking of?
So all of those checks and balances that you just mentioned are in place. The way it works on the criminal aspect of an officer-involved shooting is when all of the different agencies respond, they're paired up, and so that there's a person from an outside agency paired up with somebody from the internal agency that's taking the lead on the case. So there's that oversight. They also conduct their own interviews with some of the witnesses, and then they'll supply their supplemental reports to us for the case file. As far as oversight for the investigation, once it's completed, once it's submitted to the DA's office, the current DA, Mr. Torres, has stated that he will be sending all of the officer-involved shooting cases to an independent prosecutor for review. So he doesn't want somebody internally from his office to be reviewing those because he wants that clean slate perspective. So he has hired 2 additional attorneys who that will be their sole task, is to review officer-involved shootings. So I think that adds another great layer of accountability and checks and balances.
And that would be a learning curve in terms of seeing cases over and over. Certainly, we have a lot of cases to go through.
Correct.
So that if it's assigned to 2 prosecutors, then that might increase the quality because time after time, it's not spread out among a bunch of people, but 2 people that could give you quality feedback.
Correct. And so, I mean, we're working continually with them to improve the process. The first meeting that was just held this week, again, it was a little bit preliminary because obviously Mr. Torres had a lot of backlog to work through, so they haven't had a chance to review too many cases yet. So they gave us just some brief feedback on how they'd like to see the cases structured. So like I said, we'll be making those changes, and we'll continue to meet with them and take their feedback to make continual improvements to the cases.
Well, you can count on us to give you our feedback on whether we think it's a quality investigation or not, and I hope the others will as well. If this is, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Chair.
Major Tyler. Do we want to vote on this, board members? May I have a motion? You have to turn.
I move that we do not support this resolution.
I second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, unanimous. All right. The next item on our agenda is the communication between the POB and the staff. I think that what I've noticed is that we're getting a lot of information by email that sometimes overwhelms me. I don't know if y'all are feeling that way, but I'm trying to figure out a way that we can communicate with each other better. So I've asked Ed if he would consider sending tasks with deadlines and an actual task that comes in Microsoft, with a deadline and tells us whether or not we individually are required to participate in that task. Meetings that would require our attendance, required or optional. Notifications, obviously. But everything with a return receipt requested so that he knows. The problem is he's got 9 of us to herd around, and it's hard for him and the staff to know which thing we answered. So if it comes in a something that says we opened it, he knows we opened it. And if not, then I'll be calling. As you know, when we were going over this case that we're going to review today, we wanted to make sure that the board members had seen the case and had actually read it. So I can't call everybody because that's a rolling quorum. So we just figured out who had done the work and who we had not heard from yet, and we split up the calls. But if this was a task, we would have a better way of knowing that. The other thing is that there needs to be a way for us to be accountable to the staff when they need our input. So this is my way of trying to figure out how to do this better. And we're open to suggestions on how we might do that. If you have other ideas, please let me know now. Eric, you're good at this. What do you think?
I believe we'll try to get communication from Director Harness, one-point communication out to all of us, so we
Right.
just rather than one person. So if I see an email from him, I know it's important, I got to read it. 'Cause
Right.
I do get a lot of spam.
And I was just talking about the follow-up. So, you know, if it was necessary, he doesn't have to call 6 of us to find out whether or not we've all done it.
No, I do appreciate the read receipts and the tasks that pop up, because it reminds us when we have things
Yeah,
that are due.
and it shows up on our calendars. It really makes it better. Do you have any other thoughts about this?
I think that my opinion is just a general one, and it's one of just courtesy. So if I call you, call me back. If you email me, I email you back. I'm not even sure how the text courtesies are supposed to happen, but if I text somebody, it's because I'm trying to get hold of you. So sometimes I feel like I'm calling a text, doing a text, calling the office, calling their cell phone, calling, and or I get a voicemail. So for me, it's just a matter of courtesy. I don't necessarily need to talk to the executive director every time. I don't mind if there's a person that you delegate to do that, and I'm happy to call that person up. And if that person's off or on sick leave or something else, then who's the next person I call? That's all. I just want the little communication tree. I'm very happy with that.
Mr. Armijo, do you have anything?
Actually, Amanda and I have been working with the phone forever. I went to IT yesterday, I believe, and they tried to fix my phone, but I'm not getting, just like the case you're talking about, I did not receive it, so I could not review it. So I'm still having problems with the phone situation.
Okay,
So,
that requires intervention. We need to actually do something about that.
yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, so that needs to be fixed pronto. Can you take care of that?
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, some of these materials aren't suitable for a phone, and they're not going to come through on a phone. And those materials, especially larger volume, are going to have to be accessed through a computer.
He's saying his POB
As far as
email
the-
address
but
isn't
As
working.
far as the POB, we can certainly try to work around that as far as the POB emails. But the substance of the emails, some of them really can only be accessed and need to be accessed through a computer.
Okay, we have a problem that needs solving. Can you fix it?
Certainly.
Well, one of the things, just kind of going back just a little bit of history, you know, I'm a Bernalillo County employee. So Amanda and I, when we first started communicating, we would communicate via Bernco, BERNCO.gov, and that was fine, and that worked. But then the city said, that's not going to work, there are 2 different sites, blah, 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 you need a POB site, a CABQ site. So that's what started the whole problem, actually. If I could get everything through my Bernco site, it would be fantastic. I could see it on my
We have problems
computer.
with IPRA for that. That's why we went to the POB emails. So we have problems. We moved to that on purpose because we were all on different sites and it was a mess.
Yeah.
So if we want to, and of course we do want to comply with IPRA, we have to have a POB at CABQ
Well, then,
email. So we
yes.
have to solve that
yes, it
problem.
has to be solved, because
Okay.
I'm not getting stuff.
All right, Dr. Brown?
Anything that would streamline communications, I would support. And I'm not the best communicator around here, so I will let other people decide how to shape me up. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Rainey?
2 comments, I guess. We have 3 sites that we're dealing with nowadays with Power DMS, Evidence.com, and something I think is called
SafeLink.
SafeLink. And all of them are highly technical, and all of them are very carefully protected and to keep you out of them. So they're hard to get into, and they constantly are churning so that you can't, if you got in last week one way, you can't expect that next week it'll be the same. And I don't know that we as volunteer POB members are that good technically to be able to keep up with all that. And so I'm just concerned that we're being asked to be involved with things that are a little complex. The other thing is, when we first started this POB, if we had a meeting on a Thursday, we got 172 pages of data on a Wednesday. And so we said, okay, we'd like to ask the office to give us at least 3 days. And so now, I remember this little conversation with my wife on Monday. I said, when I go to the website today, I'm going to have 9 or 10 emails from the POB, from the CPOA. And sure enough, they were there, because Monday is 3 days prior to Thursday. If we could spread the data out over a course of a month, then we would have a better opportunity to receive it and digest it, rather than it all coming whack exactly 3 days
That's a
before the meeting.
really, really good point. And Director Harness and I have agreed that we're having a conference call on Mondays at 2 o'clock to go over all the things from that week, so that we can talk about how are we going to communicate this stuff to the board. I talked about sending out once a week to the staff, to the board, so that you got one thing a week and it was full of instructions about what you needed to do. But that's really not doable for the staff. So I'm meeting with him by the phone. We're going over the things that are coming up this week, what's coming up next week, what's after that. How are we going to prep the board so that we do this in a reasonable way? So we are trying to do that. Okay?
Understood.
The other point you made is about the materials, and maybe in your case, if the technology is really challenging for you, you may want to go look at the SafeLink stuff and the evidence.com stuff at the office, because you could do that. Okay?
Okay.
If you wanted to. For me, it's much better if I can do it from my home. So, but that's another choice that board members have. So, does that, Mr. Harness, do you have anything? Do you want to add to that?
Chair Fine, yes, the viewing station is still available for you. If that meets your needs better, then we can access all of that information through the other computer that's set up in my office, and we can do that. I believe that we send out the materials based upon the agenda that the board sets up. So it's hard for us to know what materials are needed until the board decides what the agenda is going to be. So we did send out the materials as early as possible. We sent the materials out on Friday for this meeting coming up today. And it's been my practice whenever something comes in that needs to go for board review, that as soon as I receive it, I distribute it to the board. So I'm not sure, maybe after our Monday conversations, if that generates a document list or a data production that's necessary, that's coming up, then
We can certainly
we can do it.
we can start to build the agenda during those weekly calls. I think that would make it better. And we're trying, everybody's trying, and as you get new ideas, please let us know. We want this not to be, we want this to be better communication. The IPR rules make it so that, and for good reason, make it so that only Ed can communicate with all of us. So that's the way it has to be. But our weekly meetings can make that better, and we'll try very hard to send you things that have deadlines and all of that. And we'll solve your problem, Mr. Armijo, for sure. I also wanted to say, relative to what Dr. Ring said, Major Tyler and Commander McCrae have really gone out of their way to allow us to see the evidence that we have to see on cert cases and officer-involved shootings, serious use of force, those cases online. And we just had a training session prior to this meeting for some of us who came in to try to learn that. We're going to set up more of those for those that want to learn the technology. But it's really, they've gone out of their way to make this more easy for us, because we're 9 volunteers. Some of us work full-time. and some are retired, and it's hard for all 9 of us to get the information in a timely fashion. So I am grateful to APD for getting this electronically to us, because it's going to make the time go much faster and be much more efficient use of time. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And your officer, is he still here? The one that was training us? No, he left. Well, thank you to him, too. Please pass on our appreciation. The chief's response letters. Mr. Ricard, this is what I was talking about.
Madam Chair, before we leave that topic, I've never received an answer on how to do our old email closeout. My email's still receiving, my old email, my old Gmail account's still receiving emails. Can I turn that, can I delete that off my phone now? Do you all have ownership over that?
I think you just close it, don't you? I didn't think.
I want to make sure before I take it off my phone that the CPOA has, yeah. Well, they're all, I haven't deleted anything. They're all still on there.
Did you get it on, are you getting it on both? The POB email?
I'm still getting some emails on my old email, but
So am I.
not the same emails. So I wanna make
They may
sure-
not be from the agency, though. That may be from
Yeah.
other people.
Chair Fine, Board Member Cruz, if you have all of those emails archived, you could transfer that data to us through a thumb drive or maybe a zip file.
I don't know if there's a way to do that on Gmail. It's just, there's quite a few emails, and you all have the password. I just want to know if you all have ownership over that now, or do I got to go in and download every email and bring it over to you?
My experience there, I was told I had to go to IT, have it bundled up and give them.
Okay. I just need to know how to do that.
We will get you that information.
Thank you.
I also put up on that old Gmail account, I put up this is no longer a working account. My new email address for the POB business is this, and just left it up so people would know, people outside the agency. So we are to the chief's letters. And again, I want to thank Commander McCrae for helping get these letters done. I'm sure Mr. Harness has something to add. Before he does that, I would like to say this. We now have an answer, I think, for most of the letters, if not all of them, that we had sent to the chief. However, as an example, if anyone who's been at these meetings before, you know that we will go through what the evidence showed, what our findings were, how we, and the findings would include it's sustained, it's not sustained, it's unfounded, it's exonerated. There's 5 different ways that we can judge the evidence once we go through it, once the staff does their work. The letters we got back from the chief said in this case, you said not sustained, we say exonerated. That's it, that's what the letter says. So there's no way for us as a board to learn from that. There's no way for us to understand the difference between how the police department sees something and how we as civilians see it. And so while there's an answer, it has no meat on the bone. And that's problematic because we will continue to make the same mistake, if it's a mistake, and it may not be, but we will continue to repeatedly miss an opportunity to learn why the department sees it differently than we do. Unless, and I believe the ordinance says that it should be explained why there's a difference of opinion, that we see it differently, I, the chief, see it differently, is not the same as explaining to us why you see it differently. So Major Tyler, if you want to speak to that, you're welcome to. I'd like to hear what Mr. Harness says when you're done.
Thank you, Chair Fine and members of the board. When we discussed the lack of the letters to you when we had our first meeting, when we were trying to help repair the communications, I had explained to you that I thought it would be better if we met on the whys of those non-concurrences versus putting more information in something that's a public record so that we don't get into too many details of the case. And so we had talked about having those meetings to discuss the why so that we could have that understanding and learn from each other as to why there was a different resolution on the case from each of the investigative bodies, but we haven't done that yet. So I'm happy to either pick through some of those cases, because obviously there was a lot of them that we can do that on, or we can do it from a certain point moving forward. But the reason that the letters are written in the way they were was for that purpose, which I thought we had discussed, like I said, when we met back in January.
I don't remember agreeing to that. I mean, certainly discussing the whys of things and learning is advantageous for sure. But I would say that the public absolutely needs to know that is the reason why, what the chief's non-concurrence is, what's the basis for it. So keeping that from the public is counter to what we're here to do. So I don't understand that our letters say specifically, this is what we found, here's what the evidence was, and here's what we determined, sustained, not sustained, exonerated, whatever it is. But if the chief's letter doesn't say that, there's nothing for the public to look at side by side that says there's a difference of opinion. There's no analysis we can do that will help us figure out how we're different, how civilians see it differently than the police department does. So I know I didn't agree to that. That the letters would be that circumspect. I would not do that because I think it's not what we signed up to do. I don't think it's what the city council asked us to do.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Chair Fine, on the ordinance that we're going to be talking about later tonight, in attachment C, one of the things that we talked about was the non-concurrence, and we've added a recommendation in the ordinance that the chief would come and explain publicly why there's non-concurrence. And
Well,
so we'll talk about that later.
I appreciate that, and I think that certainly our commitment is to the public and to make sure that the public knows that there is a difference of opinion and what it is. And I don't think, on the other side, I don't think that the chief can learn from us how we see things unless we're in a dialogue. So I appreciate your willingness to have a dialogue. It just doesn't supplant the need to be straight with the community and be upfront with it. So the letters don't do it for me at all. I don't know, how do you all feel?
I concur.
I have a question, Chair Fine. I guess I want to figure out a way for it to be qualitative in the terms of discussion, as Major Tyler is suggesting, but also for it to be on record. And couldn't that occur at case review? Couldn't a block of time be given to why, wherefore, why it didn't jive, why we didn't jive, and that would still go in public record, right?
Well,
And give us
the way
ability-
we had envisioned it at the case review committee was that we would post those letters side by side. This is what the POB approved and how our staff saw the evidence, and the chief said otherwise. And there may be very legitimate reasons for the chief to see it otherwise, but we're missing an opportunity to be transparent, and we're missing an opportunity to learn from each other. And those two things are reasons why I would not be in favor of it not saying it in writing, or as the ordinance proposal says, to have some kind of public forum where that can be accessible to the public. I'm concerned about the data, too, because that's part of our thing. If we're looking at this and looking at data collection for the city council, for the police department, take a look at this. If we don't have something in writing, we don't have any data. So that bothers me. What about y'all? And so who else has something to say about this?
It just makes sense.
It
It
has
just
to be in
makes
writing.
sense,
I just
period.
think that's what, Mr. Moya, can you tell me from the ordinance, was it not your expectation that the reasons why there was a non-concurrence would be explained in writing by the chief?
Chair Fine, board members, I'm looking through the ordinance right now, and what I recall from the time is that was the intent of the ordinance.
Mr. Baker, do you have any thoughts on this?
I was pulling up the language now, but you've heard from the council that was the intention, and I remember the language being drafted in a way that suggested it wouldn't just be, I didn't concur, or, bullet point form. How to navigate that and the extent of it, I think, is something that should be worked on so that you all have the information you need.
Yeah, Major Tyler, I'm going to ask Mr. Harness to speak, but if you have anything more you want to add, just do so. Come on.
No, Chair Fine and members of the board, we're happy to work with you to make sure that you're getting what you need for it to be meaningful for the citizens of Albuquerque.
Does this rationale make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we're trying to make sure that we're careful about the content of the cases, because obviously, as you know, much of that is confidential, but I understand the need to have an understanding of why there would be a non-concurrence.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harness.
Yes, Chair Fine. I share your reaction to the non-concurrence letters, that they do not meet the standard that's set forth in the ordinance, nor the settlement agreement. I would like to briefly discuss a couple of the letters that we received. First one is on case 088-16.
Wait, let us help find it. Just a second. What's the number?
08816. It's third in the batch there, I think.
I'm sorry, say it
It's
again.
third in the batch.
Third in the batch.
Yes, I think
Gotcha.
if you page through, it should be the second or third. Got it. You'll recall this was the case where the sergeant and his attorney came and presented to the body regarding the use of NCIC and our insistence that the New Mexico Department of Public Safety needed to be informed. And within that file, there was a document from the communication director from APD, Ms. Wilson, who stated that, in fact, the proper notification for that case had not happened as it was supposed to. You'll recall that?
Mm-hmm.
And so with the chief's response, which is on the second page of this letter, where the CASA directs the chief shall consult with the relevant prosecuting agency or federal law enforcement agency regarding the initiation of a criminal investigation. The chief's response is internal affairs operates on my behalf, and under my direction they consulted with both relevant state and federal prosecuting agencies to discuss specifics of this case and to determine whether or not any criminal charges were feasible. You'll recall that in this case, the presentation to the prosecuting agency was a sergeant from the Internal Affairs Division making phone calls and posing hypotheticals to attorneys.
Yeah, I do remember that.
The chief goes on to say, this information gathering process was not done as a substitute for a criminal investigation, but as a guide for the administrative investigation. IA conducted a complete administrative investigation in accordance with the CASA and the SOP guidelines. Well, that's all well and good, but the issue was whether or not the chief made the referral to the criminal authority to make an assessment as to whether or not there was any criminal charges that would be brought. In order to do that, you have to present the entire facts of the case. You can't just simply have someone call and present some hypotheticals to an attorney and then base your opinion upon that. So that troubles me in this response, that I don't believe that is what the CASA intends when we make a referral for possible criminal charges. We don't expect that simply phone calls discussing hypotheticals is an actual presentation of facts to somebody to make a criminal determination. I don't think that suffices. I'll move on to the letter responding to the cert cases, which I believe is actually the second letter in the batch.
Is there a number?
There's multiple cert cases, C-00416, 00616. It's all in one letter.
Okay.
00916. My issues with this response is that it's now describing a completely new process for reviewing a cert case to determine whether or not an internal affairs investigation should commence for determining whether or not there's been an SOP violation by the individual officer. The chief is now describing the process as the cert case is completed, the investigation is done, and then the Force Review Board will make a decision whether or not there's going to be a referral to internal affairs for an investigation, a further investigation.
For criminal activity?
Not for criminal activity, for policy violations.
Okay.
Within in the administrative portion of it.
Right.
Prior to this, my understanding was that the detective or the sergeant, whoever did the investigation, could make that recommendation right away based upon their investigation and what they find. They could simply say, yes, this needs to be referred for further investigation on behalf of this officer. There may be a violation. Now the chief is describing the process as only Force Review Board will make those determinations. So again,
tell
there's
us how that affects us in particular, or what concerns you about that change in process?
Well, I have concerns, Chair Fine, I have concerns that the process seems to be ever-changing and evolving. You're already experiencing cert cases coming with little days' notice and without your ability to review. So there would be no ability for you to review it before it goes to the Force Review Board.
So is the Force Review Board being injected before us?
The Force Review Boards are being set up. At this point, they're being set up before you have a review.
According to this letter is my point.
Well, according to what's happening practically, and according to this, this doesn't discuss the timing. This simply discusses the fact that once a cert case is completed, it has to go before the Force Review Board in 30 days, and the Force Review Board is going to make the decision whether or not there's going to be further investigation of the officer for policy violations.
Okay, and are we within that 30 days still? Would we get the case before a Force Review got it?
Chair Fine, in theory you would. And in theory, the agreement based upon our meetings with all the parties before the fourth monitor's report, when we had our status conference with all the parties, the agreement was that you were going to get the same 30 days to review it before it went to the Force Review Board.
Right.
But as you're aware, that has not been happening. So not only do I have concerns that you're not going to have input that I suppose would funnel through me at the Force Review Board, but that the investigator on the CERT team apparently now cannot make a decision whether or not there needs to be more of an investigation and a referral. All of that is being left to the Force Review Board.
So does this short circuit us in any way? Does this usurp us in any way, the way it's written?
Well, Chair Fine, there really isn't anything in writing. This is simply the chief's response in a letter.
I know, is that your concern, though?
My concern is that yes, you're not going to have input for these cases before they get to the Force Review Board.
Okay, that's certainly a concern. And if it goes to Force Review Board before we see it, because we have had concerns over at the quickness with the turnaround of this. Certainly, I don't want to see us usurped in any way, and I'm not happy about the fact that there were 5 cases that went through your office and not us. because as far as I'm concerned, that's not civilian review, so, which is our purpose. So if this change in process is something we need more information about, should we ask Major Tyler to explain it to us now?
Chair Fine, I don't know that there's a written policy that describes this process. I think that it's simply the department deciding for expediency that this is how they're going to handle the cases, and somewhere there was a decision made that the Force Review Board is going to make all determinations. And I'm not sure that that's what the Force Review Board's function is supposed to be.
Okay, so do we want a clarification on this?
We need one, certainly.
Okay. Major Tyler, we need you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Chair Fine and members of the board, there needs to be some clarification on some of what was stated. Nothing prohibits a CERT detective from still identifying other conduct that was either related directly to a use of force or that would have been unrelated to the use of force during their investigation of a serious use of force. That CERT detective, the change that was made is if a CERT detective before was doing a serious use of force investigation and identified other misconduct, they were stopping their investigation and then sending that to their IA counterpart to investigate the misconduct. Rather than delineating that investigation and causing more time to occur, I gave them the authority, because CERT is under the IA umbrella, to conduct the whole investigation. Now, if the CERT detective does not identify any misconduct, that does not prohibit the Force Review Board from identifying misconduct that maybe they feel that the investigator missed. So that would be the situation that Director Harness was explaining. So our CERT detectives absolutely do have the ability, the authority, and the duty to identify any conduct, whether it's related to a use of force or if it comes out in any other part of their investigation for a serious use of force.
And in your opinion, this does represent a change in policy, right? In process?
It represents a change in practice, but not in policy.
Okay, and in your opinion, how does that affect this body?
I don't think it does. We are required to send you all serious use of force cases, which would still occur.
Okay, in the same time frame?
Correct. As soon as the case goes to the Force Review Board is when we are now sending you the case to the POB for review as well.
Okay, so Mr. Harness doesn't need to worry about whether or not the CERT investigator has an opportunity to raise a red flag, or the Force Review Board does it either. Is that correct?
Correct. Anybody has a right to raise a red flag, as far as I'm
And
concerned.
does that satisfy you? Does that an answer you need?
Chair Fine, certainly, as Major Tyler describes it, that's certainly not detailed in the letter from the chief.
Okay, well, you can see why this would be concerning.
Yes.
That's another problem with the letter.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would just ask Major Tyler that when we have like the breaking down of IA, when we were talking about the workflow, the breaking it down to the CERT and FIT and, all of that stuff happened and we didn't know about it. So, even the agency may know about it, and I'm not sure they knew it completely, but when that stuff changes, we need to know because it affects us. Okay?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Also, if I may add one other thing, Director Harness also mentioned that, there is some frustration that things seem to be continually evolving, and we see that as a good thing. Obviously, all of these reforms are very complex, and we're continually striving to improve the processes, which is why you're seeing the changes that you are.
Yeah, it's just concerning when something changes like this, and we see it in a letter like this, and then that's how we know. So it's concerning. So I realize you're it's a moving thing, and we all think that's a good thing. We all want to get to the good place where the relation between the police department and the audience, the community, is good, and it's going to require change. But we need to be kept in the loop, okay, for all of that.
Yes.
We appreciate your
Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
being here
members of the
for
board.
that reason.
Chair Fine, can I just,
Sure.
a point of clarification for Director Harness? It was my understanding through this just communication, there's 30 days that we have to review it prior to it going to the Force Review Board, is that correct?
It
Chair
used to be
Fine,
correct.
Board Member Armijo, yes, that is the agreement, that once the case is completed, it must go before the Force Review Board in 30 days. So once the case is completed and ready for the Force Review Board, the CPOA and the POB are supposed to get that file at the same time.
We're working on a chart. Mr. Larson and I are working on a chart that's being revised, that we had, but it's being revised, and that will make more sense to you
Clarify some of
soon.
that stuff? Okay.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chair, fine, members of the board, just to clarify my earlier answer, we were talking in the context of the ordinance earlier when you asked about what the intent was, and I found additional information I think would be relevant to that question just briefly. Paragraph 285 of the settlement agreement, when it describes what the report back from the chief is supposed to read, it says the chief must provide a written report to the agency articulating the reasons its recommendations were not followed. So in terms of what the expectation is from the settlement agreement.
So just saying
It's
we saw those facts differently doesn't do it.
The standard would be that the reasons for the disagreement are articulated.
Good, thank you. That's what we were hoping for, too. Yes, sir.
Before we leave this particular issue, I've actually been looking at these letters from the chief, and every one of them, the last line says, "Please contact me if any further clarification is needed." Well, let's contact him and say, we need further clarification.
I think we've done that through Major Tyler. The commander is giving me his nod. Yes, yes, we have. Okay. I think that we should plan on, do you want to take a break now or at 6:30?
I have one minor objection, and that is I'll have to leave, and so I won't be able to
okay.
make the Community Outreach Subcommittee report, but it could be made by Mr. Armijo or by Amanda.
Okay, Sue, are you leaving as well? Are you staying? You're staying, good. We need him, we need you for a quorum, okay. I think we'll break now then. Shall we do that?
I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay with everybody? Oh, yeah, we could do the consent agenda. Can we just jump ahead? Okay, Mr. Cruz has suggested that we take care of the consent agenda while we can, which would require we go back to Judge Brack in the City Council study session after the break. The consent agenda these were reviewed by the Case Review Committee, and I would accept a motion to accept these cases as they were written, and unless somebody has a concern. So I need a motion first and a second.
Also move.
Second.
Please,
Second.
Eric. Okay, does anybody have anything about those cases that you want discussed? Is there anything?
No.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second that these cases be passed as written. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's unanimous. Should we do the Amandar's case before we break? I just want to do it while he's here. Okay. Do you want to introduce this, sir?
Chair, fine, fellow board members, yes. I-16915. This shooting occurred on December 14th, 2014. The multi-jurisdictional investigative team concluded its investigation April 14th of 2015. The Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office ruled on this shooting September 22nd of 2015. Internal Affairs completed their review on November 23rd of 2015. As to the officer who discharged his weapon, 1, did Officer N comply with Albuquerque Police Department Procedural Order 2-526, paragraph 11, which states, firearms, pre-deployment considerations, officers will adhere to all firearm safety rules as outlined in department training. Officers must recognize once a firearm is drawn and no longer secured in the holster, their ability to react with other than deadly force to a particular situation may be diminished. It is further It is therefore vital a firearm be drawn only when deadly force can be reasonably anticipated. Paragraph 1, nothing in this section is meant to prevent officers from having their firearms in a deployed position when confronted with situations which may escalate with such speed as the officer's ability to react defensively would be unacceptably slow as a result of having a holstered weapon. Firearms safety rules: 1, all guns are always loaded. 2, never let the muzzle cover anything you are not willing to destroy. 3, keep your finger off the trigger unless your sights are on a target and you have made the decision to fire. Emphasis added by myself. And 4, be sure of your target. Emphasis added again by myself. Findings. The CPOA finds Officer N's conduct sustained, where the investigation determines by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. Recommendation. The policy in place on December 14, 2014 lists a violation of this SOP as a level 3. This is a first offense. Therefore, I recommend an 88-hour suspension for Officer N. Recommendation number 2, the Internal Affairs Division review the investigation and findings reached by Detective D and provide the POB with a report and an after-action report. Recommendation number 3, the Internal Affairs Division initiate an investigation into the improper search, Perrin, protective sweep Perrin, of 513 Charleston Street, Southeast, Apartment 4, ordered by Sergeant K. On December 14, 2014, at approximately 5:01 a.m., officers were dispatched to 513 Charleston Street, Southeast, regarding a possible burglary. The caller stated 2 men arrived at the location in a red pickup truck and were removing items from Apartment 4. Upon arrival near the scene, Officers N and A approached the apartment complex on foot. Officer A observed a green sedan being driven out of the apartment complex. He noted the license plate of the vehicle but did not stop it. Officers also observed a red pickup truck parked on the opposite side of the street from the apartment complex. Officers made contact with the driver of the truck, later identified as David McCluskey. Mr. McCluskey stated he went to the apartment with his friend, quote, Drew, unquote, to retrieve some of Drew's property. He further stated Drew entered the apartment through a window and handed him items from within the apartment. One of those items being a scooter. Officer N located a scooter in the back of the truck. Mr. McCluskey was detained and placed in the back of Officer N's police car. The relevant timeline. First, at approximately 5:01 a.m., officers are dispatched. Next, at approximately 5:18, officers arrive on scene. At approximately 5:33 a.m., at approximately 5:28 a.m., officers advise 1 person in custody. At approximately 5:33 a.m., officers request a field investigator. At approximately 5:42 a.m., Sergeant K advised dispatch to send the on-call burglary detective's number to Officers N and Officer A. At approximately 5:53, Sergeant K arrived on the scene. At approximately 6 a.m., Sergeant K ordered a protective sweep of the apartment. At approximately 6:02 a.m., Sergeant K advised shots fired. Upon the order of Sergeant K, Officers N and A went to Apartment 4 to conduct a protective sweep of the apartment in order to allow the field evidence tech to process the burglary scene. At this point in the investigation, officers had not identified a victim, nor had they established Mr. McCluskey, and Drew did not have permission to enter the apartment and retrieve the property. Additionally, a warrantless search or protective sweep incident to a lawful arrest may only be conducted in an area, quote, adjoining the arrest, unquote. Mr. McCluskey was detained across the street from the apartment complex. This is contrary to standards outlined in Maryland v. Bowie. Bowie is spelled B-U-I-E, 494 U.S. 325, 1990. It is also contrary to APD Procedural Order 2-17-16-D, search and seizure without a warrant. Therefore, I recommend Sergeant K be investigated for ordering an out-of-policy search. Officer N and Officer A approached the apartment. They removed a plastic covering from a window and called for any possible occupants to come forward. Officer N entered the apartment through the broken window. He drew his firearm from its holster. As he stepped forward, he slipped, causing the weapon to discharge. The projectile went through the floor into the apartment below, striking the victim in the neck. The internal investigation does not reveal any evidence to show that the weapon malfunctioned. Therefore, the only conclusion is Officer N's finger pulled the trigger of this firearm, causing it to discharge. This is a violation of the policy as outlined above. Therefore, I recommend an 88-hour suspension for Officer N. A complete burglary investigation revealed the apartment was rented by Orlando Parada. At the time of this incident, he was detained at the Metropolitan Detention Center. The window of the apartment had been broken the previous night by Orlando's fiancée and had been reported to APD. The investigation further revealed Drew was Andrew Cerna, a friend of Orlando's, who had permission to enter the apartment and remove the items he removed. Officers were conducting an out-of-policy search when Officer N discharged his weapon. But for this out-of-policy search, the officer would have never been in the position to discharge his weapon and injure the victim. Regarding the review by the IA detective, the detective reviews the conduct in relation to utilization of department equipment, an issue I deem irrelevant, and exonerates the officer. The detective also finds not sustained as to the firearm discharge. His reasoning in part is as follows. Officer N was entering an apartment that had just been burglarized and had information of possible multiple suspects inside. That statement is false. He goes on to explain possible contributing factors as wetness of boots, dark conditions, and, quote, many unforeseeable factors that led to the accidental discharge. However, he acknowledges Officer N's finger pulled the trigger. The policy is clear when an officer may pull the trigger of his firearm. Therefore, I recommend Internal Affairs Division review the investigation and findings reached by Detective D and provide the POB with an after-action report. Review of the investigative file of Internal Affairs and any opinion expressed in this letter are pursuant to the duties of the CPOA as described in the POB ordinance and are not intended for any other purpose. I stand for questions.
Do any of you have questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, Mr. Harness. Being as how this is a long time ago, and we are now in March of 2017, are these officers still a part of APD?
Chair, fine. Board Member Ring, yes, they are.
Okay.
Mr. Armijo.
In regards to, I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around the officer, I'm going through a mental picture of him, it being dark, the window, there was glass that was broken, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
So there's glass around, but he still, as we were trained, you never put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to use it. So he could have, did he slip? It doesn't really say here in regards to anything specific.
Chair, fine. Board Member Armijo. When the officers arrived on the scene, there was actually a plastic covering that was over the window, which was placed in front of the window by the landlord the previous night. The window was fully broken out. The officer entered the window entered through the window and had both of his feet on the floor when he took a step and then discharged his weapon. It was not a matter of him discharging his weapon as he tried to enter the apartment through the window. He was inside the apartment with both feet on the floor.
Okay, the other part that I have was, there was a suit brought by this person to the city of Albuquerque? for the
Chair
fire?
Fine, yes. Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, yes, that civil action has been settled. As I recall, the settlement amount was around $400,000.
I have a question about, I tried to imagine, and I'm not a lawyer. This may be one of my worst assets or best, I don't know. But not a lawyer, as a person who's not a lawyer, I don't understand what the expectation is, since the owner of the apartment was at MDC and not reachable. At that moment in time, what does the law say that the person, I would think that law enforcement should want to clear the apartment to make sure nobody else is there. So, but you're saying they should have had a search warrant, they should have known, but they didn't find that out till later. So how should they have known?
Chair Fine, some of that information was available through RTCC,
What is that?
the Real-Time Crime Center.
Okay.
The fact that there was a CAD, a computer-aided dispatch for that address the previous night, which details the window being broken out and the landlord responding and...
So that was readily available to them?
Chair Fine, yes. Beyond that, the law does not allow, unless there's an exigent circumstance or unless the arrest is adjoining the apartment, the law does not allow an officer to enter that apartment because of
Even
that
for
owner's...
safety, just to make sure everybody's okay? You don't know that there isn't somebody in that apartment? Right?
Chair Fine, that's correct, but you still have to get a warrant. And their reasoning to do this protective search to process the burglary scene is for a burglary that had not even occurred. So there needed to be some investigation. And they hadn't even identified the victim.
So they
hadn't identified who the apartment owner was. They hadn't done just some basic steps of an investigation in order to determine whether or not a crime had been committed.
Okay. I understand your point. I'm a little confused by what I would expect. You know, if I was the person calling 911 and saying somebody's walking out of there, two guys are walking out with stuff, the window's broken, and they come and they see guys that are leaving with some of the stuff, with stuff in their cars, and they go to the window's broken, and glass on the inside. I don't know that I would, maybe this is a lawyer thing, but it sounds to me like the safe thing to do is to make sure nobody is in that apartment that's wounded or hurt in any way, or more bad guys. I don't know. I don't know the legalese of it. So those are my concerns. But I'm ready for a motion.
Chair Fine, there could have been some very basic questions that they asked Mr. McCluskey, who they had detained. When you approached the apartment, did Drew break the window? Did you see him break the window? How did you see him enter? Did you see him remove plastic? And I mean, those types of basic investigatory questions that need to be asked so that you can form a basis to determine whether or not you have probable cause to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. And that simply didn't take place. Okay. Simply a sergeant is going to come on the scene and say, hey, go do a protective search, but you can't do that when you arrest somebody across the street. If they had been seen coming out of the apartment.
Well, they were seen by the person who called 911.
Not the officers.
Not the officers. Okay.
The officers did not observe that. Okay. They observed a green sedan leaving and a red pickup truck across the street.
And I read it all. I'm ready for a motion. Somebody make a motion about whether you want to.
I would move that we sustain the CPOA's letter, and
As it's written.
as it's written.
Approve it as it's written.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Yes.
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 No. Okay. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to, do we have to do that break thing?
Chair, fine, if you want to do the executive session while we're on break.
Yes,
Go through
I
that
do.
procedure now.
Okay, so, meeting with counsel pending litigation or personnel issues, closed discussion and possible action regarding pending litigation or personnel issues, matters subject to the attorney-client privilege pertaining to threatened or pending litigation in which the public body is or may become a participant pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 1015, 1H7, and limited personnel matters pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 1015, 1H2. Is that correct?
That's correct, and then you just need to do a
A motion.
motion and a roll call vote on the
Okay.
motion to go into
I need a
executive
motion.
session.
I motion we go into executive session.
A second?
All those in favor, please respond.
Yes.
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 Okay, we're going.
Chair, I hate to do this. Can you roll call it? You
Oh,
gotta
I'm
go
sorry, roll
individually.
call. Mr. Cruz?
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Garcia? Joanne Fine, yes?
Dave Ring, yes.
Sue Brown, yes.
Johnny J, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I move that the POB resume its session.
Second.
All those in favor, roll call?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have to read anything into this, Mr. Baker?
Yes, Chair, fine, members of the board. The only thing you need to do is come out of executive session with a motion stating that, that all that was discussed were matters subject to the attorney-client privilege related to threatened or pending litigation. That language from the agenda, and roll call coming out so that everyone confirms that was the nature of the discussion during closed session.
So we have to do it over?
Yes.
Okay. So, will someone make a motion that we are coming out of executive session only having discussed matters of attorney-client privilege and personnel matters?
So moved.
Second.
Is that okay?
Yes, and then just do the roll call out,
Okay.
and then you're done.
Yes.
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 I knew there was a way to do this. Okay. So we are back at, under item number 7, Judge Brack status conference. Is it the 9th of May?
Chair Fine, tentatively, it's scheduled for May 8th.
8th, I'm sorry. GP wanted to know that. I wasn't sure. I told him I thought it was the 9th. But it's the 8th, May 8th, which is what day of the week?
A Monday.
A Monday. Okay, and the address will be sent to us about where we're going. Is it the same 500 Gold?
Chair Fine, as far as I know, that's the courtroom where we'll be, but
If it's not that, would you let us know?
we will let you know.
Okay. And all board members are asked to come if you can. It starts what time? Do you know? I think I have it in my...
9 a.m., I believe.
Let's check.
An invite was sent out, so it should be in your calendar.
It doesn't say the time here for me. So one of the reasons this is on the agenda is not only to let you know that it's coming, but that we would be able to have a discussion about what items should be included in our report to the judge. I hope you've gotten a chance to see Ed's report that he submitted to the monitor, to Mr. Gianquento. and in which he raises a lot of really good points. We want to know if you want to add to those points. You may not know that now, what you want to add. If you do, please tell me what else you'd like to add. Otherwise, I'd need to hear from you in the next week or so. Let's put a date on that. 2 weeks from today, I would like to hear from you about what things you would like brought up in our testimony to Judge Brack. Please make sure that you have a copy of Ed's report to the monitor so that you can use that as a reference. And I would ask you to write to me with any thoughts you have about that testimony. Is there anything else besides your report, Mr. Harness, that you would like included that isn't in there?
Chair Fine, no. I think the report lays out our concerns for this monitoring period.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Fine?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to sound like
We like hearing your voice, it's okay.
repetitive. Just make sure if anyone submits suggestions to you on that it's not to the entire board and there isn't a
Right,
board
you have to
quorum
send them
discussing the
individually to me.
substance or agreeing on what's going to be, because that would be outside the context of an open meeting. Sorry to be a squeaky wheel.
That's okay. It's important. We don't screw this up. So send them just to me. I'll compile them, and Ed and I will talk about them. If I have any concerns or questions about what you send me, I'll call you. Okay? All right, the City Council study session. Mr. Harness and I spoke at the City Council study session, which was just about the POB. Dr. Garcia was there as well, as was Paul Scotch-DePole and Amanda Bustos from the staff. I was very pleased to see all of the city councilors were there. Julian Moya was there as well, as were other people from the city. I thought they asked great questions. I think they know that we're going to suggest some changes to the ordinance. That came up, but briefly. So I thought that was helpful. I was really grateful that all of them gave us that time. And we were very frank with how we felt about what was going on or wasn't going on. And Mr. Harness, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Chair Fine, no, I echo your sentiments that it was a good meeting, and we appreciated the City Council giving us the time to discuss concerns. And it was heartening to hear President Benton discuss amendments to the ordinance, even in his opening remarks before we even had a chance to ask or answer questions.
Right. Mr. Moyer, you were there. Do you have any thoughts to share with us?
Chair. Excuse me, Chair Fine, members of the board. Not too much to share really, but the councilors were appreciative of the presentation and the discussion that occurred at the study session. So thank you to Chair Fine and Mr. Harness.
Okay, thank you very much. I was really grateful to them. They have been so overwhelmingly supportive of this body. I really am grateful to them, and I know all the other board members are as well. Moving on, we have, do we have any Garrity materials, Mr. Harness, that we need to vote on?
Chair Fine, no, not at this time.
Okay, so that's just a standard placeholder in case we do?
That's correct.
That's correct, okay. Reports from subcommittees. Mr. Armijo, would you do Dr. Ring's report on the community outreach?
Sure. We had our meeting on February the 27th, and we talked about several things. We did the usual approval of minutes. We had a public comment by Mr. Larson. We discussed the plans for a study session. And what we're going to do is we have basically some ideas in regards to having a good understanding of the audience that we're going to be presenting to, knowing the subject matter, so that we'll be able to communicate and articulate the true position of the committee and the POB. As I had mentioned, that 15-minute video or whatever it is of the CPOA, that was brought up. We also were kind of going back and forth in regards to, not going back and forth, but kind of establishing community partnership with who and why. You know, thinking about that, kind of pushing it out there. And then we talked about how long the members are going to be on the POB. We also talked about the fact that we're going to have the purpose, the goals, and objectives, and timelines at our next meeting. Each one of the representatives are going to have what they think the purpose is, what they think the goals should be, objectives, and timelines. So we're all doing that individually. We'll come together at our next meeting and kind of pull it together so we have our little mission statement, if you will.
I have a question
Sure.
about the outreach effort. I know that a good deal of time was in getting that position approved and then getting that person online for the outreach coordinator. And then we were in the throes of NACOL, so we had that all going on. And also the CPCs, you know, there was a lot of work going on that took Amanda's time and Mr. Harness's time as far as that's concerned. But I guess when I envision outreach, I envision it really going out into the community, meeting with neighborhood associations, meeting with community centers, getting the word out about what it is we're doing. Is that what you're talking about as far as doing?
You are on point.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking forward
That's
to that.
exactly, and we talked about going to all 4 quadrants of the city, community centers, neighborhood associations, because I don't have a good enough understanding yet to present. And, you know, I need more information, I need to be educated better. But to take that, if we have in our minds, if we have Mr. Harness with the little video, that'll open it up, and then we can start discussing, talking about what is the CPOA? That's how I do it. What is the CPOA? What is the POB? What are the duties and responsibilities? How do they interact together? What are we here for? What are we trying to do? Mm-hmm. So it's basically giving an understanding and then open for questions. So, but yeah, it's exactly, you're on point.
Well, I think we mentioned this at the last meeting, but the OSIS course that Amanda Bustos and Mr. Harness are doing is someplace probably, you can see them live doing it, but it also is possible you could set up a camera to take that video of that class that they're doing. When is that? May?
Chair Fine, that's May 23rd.
It's too far out, maybe, but.
At 1:30?
Say it again?
It's May 23rd at 1:30 in the afternoon.
That may be too far out, but I'm just saying there's going to be a live stand-up routine.
Right,
class.
that's what we're talking
So,
about.
okay.
Yeah, well, that's what we're talking about filming, but I'm not talking about us filming it. I'd like to see maybe city staff could do something more professional than what we could do.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah, for
Okay.
sure. No, I just meant they're going to be
I
making that
move a lot, you know,
presentation.
Chair
Sure.
Fine?
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if there's a plan for more of the marginalized populations in our city to reach out to them. Like, for example, the bus riders would be a large group, or people that maybe show up on the corner of Central and Eubank for a food distribution on Sunday night, or Rock, which is a feeding site, a meal site. I was just wondering if you've been talking about the groups that don't frequent the usual community centers,
Absolutely
et
not.
cetera.
We've
Okay.
not.
Well, I would just
That's a good point, good
bring
point.
that up, that
Well, that's
might
what we
be a
need. We
nice
need that
group to
input,
talk
sure.
with, and the homeless population in general.
Good point.
Thank you.
Is it your expectation that all of the members of the board will help in taking this show on the road, if you will?
Honestly, I really haven't thought about that. This is only our second meeting, and that was only our second meeting, and we're just kind of getting ourselves together.
Okay,
But that's something to consider.
okay.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you might have to have different strategies for the marginalized people.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Sure.
And you should have access to Dr. Baca's notes. She had put together a list. So somewhere, I'm sure Mr. Harness has that information, because they were thinking about mental health groups, patient side of it, homeless. Those are populations that interact with the police on a regular basis, and there's issues in that group.
I actually did a little presentation. There was a couple of caseworkers from UNM, and we were talking about this. And so, yeah, we're going to spread it out.
Okay.
But it's a matter of time, you know, we're going to get things done. But that's why we need our mission statement and our goals, so we can have a strategy to follow.
Okay, and Mr. Armijo, you're on the outreach committee. Are you on any other committees?
No, that's it.
Okay,
Right now, that's all I can do.
okay. And Sue, your policy, but are you on any of the other ones?
I beg your pardon?
Are you in any other committees besides policy?
No.
Okay.
Although policy has several other committees associated with it.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
okay.
you know.
And Eric, you're on policy, right? And you're also on the personnel committee, right? Okay, I just want to make sure I have that all down. Okay. Policy and procedure, you have a lot for us to cover, ma'am. So
I do. We'll see, but not all of it is new
Okay.
to you. All right. Maybe it'd be easier to do the things that'll go fastest, which
Okay.
would be, one thing is the final report that Miriam Vierplu put together about the drug testing compliance.
Yes.
And, you know, that question got raised because of the number of accidents that were being reported by IA, and so we ended up looking at it in depth. It took a little while to get the actual raw data, but eventually it came through, and it really, as you can see from reading it in your packet tonight, that really APD is quite compliant with drug testing, and so that's something that we can put to rest, I think. So we really appreciate the help that we got to get the data and to, you know, to relieve our anxiety about this whole thing.
Okay, so you're satisfied?
Definitely
Okay.
satisfied.
So do we need to do
One of the other
anything with
things,
this?
though, that was related to this drug testing was that on one of the first, if not the very first, officer-involved shooting that we reviewed, it turned out that our recommendation was that the officers involved in fatal shootings at least be drug tested. Because if you're in an accident, APD is indeed drug testing people, but I think it's probably time to continue pushing that, or getting a better explanation as to why that's not happening.
If one is true, why not the other?
Why not the other? And
Okay.
I actually maybe should ask you if you have some ideas of how to move forward on this tonight.
I would start with APD and ask them what is their policy and why doesn't it include drug testing? I would start there, because they may have a reason. I don't know
Okay.
what it is.
Should we write them a letter, or what would you like, an
Yeah,
informal
write it
conversation?
to Major Tyler.
Have her come back up here?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, there is a response from the chief that the drug testing matter was referred to HR, so perhaps the follow-up is to follow up with the chief to find out what response he received from HR as to
Okay.
why.
That was like, what, 8 months ago?
Yes.
I'd rather hear from Major Tyler now.
Chair Fine and members of the board, I would have to research it exactly, but my understanding through the course of my career is to one of the reasons why many agencies or departments had not adopted that practice is because the reason you do a drug test when there's an accident is because clearly there was an action that you didn't intend, whereas in most officer-involved shootings, it's an intentional action that you were taking in the course of your law enforcement duties. So just like any other crash where there could be a suspicion of influence of drugs or alcohol, that's the purpose of drug testing in relation to vehicle crashes, which doesn't also apply to an officer-involved shooting. So I know that's the historical premise of why that's not
Okay.
consistently done, but I would have to research to see if there was actually any other reasoning behind it.
I wonder if other police departments in other cities do that, and if so, why? And if not, why not? You know, if it's the same reason you have. I would start
If we
there.
could check there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Fine,
Thank you,
members of the
Major
board.
Tyler.
Yeah, I
Next,
think the
ma'am.
first case we looked at, drugs and alcohol did come up in some people's minds of whether something else was involved. So, okay,
Well,
but
and
we'll
it might
look.
be what would trigger that. You know, if it doesn't happen in all cases, if it
Mhm.
happened in, if there was suspicion, how would it be triggered?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's,
Yeah.
I would ask that question too.
Okay. All right, after that, you have in your packet a letter about OPA. It's written to Chief Eden. And this situation with OPA recently has evolved. I think this letter points out that we really appreciate how OPA was set up and what was intended to do and the process. But for those of us going there, it appears that once in a while it really works exactly like it was meant to work. It's been wonderful in the domestic violence situation, for example. But other meetings, the agenda is just unbelievably crowded. There's just no way that material can get out, that experts are there, the community's involved, that best practices are there, that the best spokespeople are there. It has been falling apart. And for me, and I think for Miriam and Ed, we have great respect for Cara Garcia, who's the person who does the OPA, who's in charge of calling the meetings and leading them. But her agenda gets just crowded with other things that she can't follow the directions or that we originally thought were going to be part of OPA. So
Okay,
what
can
we'd
we
like...
just- Can we just
Go
say
ahead.
that OPA was supposed to be
Oh.
the think tank place?
Right.
And so for people who may be listening or in the audience that don't know this, OPA is supposed to be the think tank. So if the think tank gets bogged down with too many things to think about at once, it becomes dysfunctional. Is that your point?
That's the point. So anyhow, there's a letter pointing this out to Chief Eden, and you have it in your packet. There are 5 different points there that we make, and we'd like them to be able to seriously address the problems with OPA. I think having enough staff is a major issue, that it is an understaffed function. As the letter points out, Judge Garcia is supposed to be part of it, but we have yet to see him. Now, he may be somewhere else in the process, but the real meeting when we get together and talk about issues, he's not there. So anyhow, those are some of the points that we have on here.
Okay.
Read
Do
them.
you,
Do you
So
have any
this is a letter.
questions about any of them?
Yeah. Are there any questions about the letter?
I had a question. Do we have, is David Martinez still going to be CC'd on this?
Say it
No.
again.
David
No.
Martinez no longer is at, but I would send it to Elizabeth Martinez.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for catching that. All right. Then after that is the ordinance.
Well, let's make
Oh,
sure
sorry.
that the board passes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
this,
Thank
approves
you.
of this letter.
Thank you.
So do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion that we accept this letter to send to Chief Eden about the OPA situation.
I
There are a
second it.
couple of typos I found in here, so I'll fix those.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. I think I'm going to need Ed to help me on this, but at a recent OPA meeting, there was a lot of discussion about promotion of sergeants and lieutenants and the process. The union came with a lot of comments about this particular HR policy, and the city had a lot to say about where they thought changes were indicated. And the There've been now 2 meetings on it, right? Or is it 3 now?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, there was, I don't know if you could consider the first meeting a meeting because it simply was, it was brought up there and then tabled when the city's version of the policy and APOA's version of the policy were presented to us for review. There was subsequently another meeting, and at that meeting, sitting with the city attorneys, an attorney for the APOA, the president of the APOA, and myself, along with the OPA chair, Ms. Garcia. We spent the entire meeting discussing the APOA's position that for promotion, for the chief to have just cause to remove somebody from consideration for promotion, that the officer must have had 200 hours of suspension for use of force within the previous year. That was the standard that the APOA was presenting for the definition of just cause for the chief. And we spent the entire 2 hours discussing that provision. And subsequently, Dr. Brown's comments and considerations were not discussed at that meeting, but I did forward those to the city attorney's office and the APOA and their attorney for them to be considered. Subsequently, the 2 parties had a meeting on their own, and based upon my discussions with the president of the APOA, those discussions were not fruitful, so it appears that the decision is going to be made by the judge as to how that policy is shaped.
And do you expect that to happen on May 8th? Or before?
Chair Fine, this is not in front of Judge Brack.
A different judge.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And is there, the part that I've pointed out that isn't fleshed out is that they talk about community policing in the policy. They don't really define, well, they do define what it is, but there are no community members that are involved at all in the selection process or in developing the questions that are being used. There's no resource material related to community policing. There is nothing but just the language there, and it's just abandoned, and the policy then goes on talking about everything else. Do you know any way that we can get a place at the table? Because I think the whole policy has been sort of maybe co-opted over the 200 hours of the chief's ability to remove someone from consideration. Are the other issues going to be talked about that we have?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I was given assurances by Ms. Holtz from the City Attorney's Office that your considerations would be, the points that you made would be considered.
Would we be invited to the meeting where they are considered? Do you know?
That I do not know.
What do you think our next step should be? Do you have an idea?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I think your only outlet is to insist that it come back to OPA for consideration.
The policy comes back to OPA?
Yes.
Okay. Is there someone else would like to speak to that? Yeah.
Ms. Hernandez, do you have an idea you would like to share?
Yes, Chairwoman Fine and members of the board, there are 2 suggestions that I would have when it comes to your question about how to have input onto that policy. One would be that well, 3, I guess. You could do that through the OPA meetings, or you could send a letter to me or to Ms. Holtz with your ideas. The third is that because this is a City of Albuquerque regulation as opposed to a police department standard operating procedure, it goes through a public hearing process. And so this will first go through the resolution process that all of the policies do with the Department of Justice, the APOA, and the Monitor. But after that, it will need to go to public hearing. So it will be noticed for public hearing, and then there will be an open meeting where anyone can contribute comments or suggestions, and then those will be considered before a final version is prepared. So those would be a few opportunities to provide that type of input.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
All right.
And I'm sorry, one other issue,
Yeah.
to address another question you had raised about when this might be resolved in terms of timing. It's my understanding that right now it's in that time period where we are supposed to try to, the city is supposed to try to resolve objections raised by the APOA, but then it will need to go to the monitor. And then the monitor will have the 15-day period in the settlement agreement to resolve those disagreements. And if he approves the policy, then it will be for the APOA to raise objections with Judge Brack. And then it would be in Judge Brack's court to decide how to rule on those objections. But as far as, it may get to Judge Brack, I may be able to get that answer while we're sitting here, but I think that if it's with us right now for resolution, that is a 15-day period. I just don't know where we are in the 15 days. And then it goes back to Dr. Ginger for a 15-day resolution period with him.
So we might write a letter to Ms. Holtz or Ms. Hernandez and copy Dr. Ginger so he knows our position on there too, when that would work. Okay? Okay.
Okay, so then that takes us to the ordinance. We've been talking about this for a long time. This comes up, I think it's a very important time for us to be working on this and moving it forward.
Let's start with how has everyone read it? Since we got these in advance, it really helped to get it in advance. Thank you. Miriam, I think.
Has everyone had a chance to read it?
I have. Have the rest of you? This is one that looks like this.
We've got to get
theirs is red and green. I can't read the green, so I changed it.
Yeah, it's hard to read the colors. We've talked about this for a while, both formally and informally. At the last policy meeting, Matt was here on behalf of Mark Baker. Matt Jackson was the lawyer present. And then Ed was there, Miriam, Diane was there, and Eric and I, and Michelle took notes for us. And what you have in your packet, I want you to look at what would be called Attachment C in the policy. And it should be at the bottom there. Is where it says or at least my copy says attachment. There's C, D, does yours? Maybe I have the wrong policy. Let me just look here. The one in your folder. The one in the folder is different, never mind. Okay, let's do it this way then. The one you have in your folder, second page. Second page tells you sort of a guideline to where the changes are. And the changes that are in bold are the changes that we have not talked about as a group before. And that is the requirement of APD to participate in a hearing on non-concurrence for policy investigations findings. And that's on page 4B and page 10C. And that relates to the discussion we've had earlier tonight. In order to have a public discussion when there are non-concurrences. And I think we need to know more what the thinking is, and I think the public needs to know, as we've already said tonight, as to why there are disagreements and to hear the logic behind them.
Well, I want to speak to that because that's the part that I really got stuck on. And I'm a real middle child, so I see everything from
all the different perspectives. And so from a chief's perspective, you heard Major Tyler talk about the concern she has about getting too detailed in cases. Obviously, we've already said we think that there should be something that explains the rationale, not just the difference of opinion, but the rationale for that difference of opinion. But even if we got the letters like that, that still doesn't allow for public comment. If we were to share those here at this meeting, the two different letters, and a compare and contrast, we could have some public comment here. I would be happy, I understand the benefits of both, but I would be happy if at least we knew. I don't know if it's reasonable to assume that the chief himself is going to come and tell us his rationale in a public forum. I don't know if that's reasonable, but I certainly agree with what was said before, that we need to understand the reasons, and we need to be able to show the public what the difference of opinion is. So, I will vote for this as you see fit. I will cast my vote with you, but I see some problems with the request of a hearing. And I want there to be clear that I want to know the differences of opinion.
Okay.
But I don't know that a hearing is a logical next step. If we got the letters, would that preclude, that actually said why there was a difference of opinion? Would that be enough?
Well, it says here that we can decide. It says may.
Oh, okay.
So it says that the POB may conduct a hearing requiring the chief or his designee.
Okay.
So we tried to make it, how do you say it? Workable.
Yeah.
That's the right
Flexible.
word. Thanks,
Yeah.
Johnny. Yeah, so that was that one that's a problem. And then, not a problem, but it's a bigger change than than the other things we've been talking about previously. And the other one is the change allowing POB to have subpoena power. And the reason for this is that this had been in place in the agency that we have replaced, yeah. And it's not like, the subpoena power is already in the ordinance for audits. But the subpoena power for things like videos from banks, maybe, that the bank has a policy that they will not give out their video unless there's a subpoena. Or it could be for a 7-Eleven or other convenience store. There would be a policy.
Any business could have
A
that.
business of any sort might come up with that. And a third one would be for telephone records, that they will not release them unless there's a subpoena.
So
Go ahead.
I wonder if that means that I'm sure the police can subpoena it, but if the police choose not to, could we subpoena it? That's the question.
That's what we'd like to be able to do. Maybe it's something that we, in our review of the case, feel would be very helpful.
Well, I wonder
For
what
example.
if let's say the police department does subpoena the records for a bank, let's say the video, can they release it to us to see it as part of the evidence?
Oh, I don't know
Or does
the
that
answer to
require
that.
another subpoena? I don't know the answer to that question. So having subpoena power works for us.
Works for us.
It assures
And
we could
in
get
talking to
access to information.
In talking to our investigators, in the last 10 years, they think that we've only had 5 or 6 occasions where we've needed subpoena power like
That the
this.
POC had?
That the
The POC.
the POC which preceded us. So it's not like something that we need frequently, but when we need it, we need it. And so
Okay.
that's why it's been added.
Like insurance.
Insurance, yeah.
Well, it means that we have access to all the information we need to
need.
make a fair
Right.
decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other things that are in here we've already talked about. Maybe there's a word that got changed here and there, but there's nothing major.
Okay.
And if you have any questions from reading it,
I found
please
some
ask me.
typos. I'll
but
give you my typos.
Give me typos, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Chair, fine members of the board, on the subpoena issue, I went back through the settlement agreement to see what it said on that question. And paragraph 283 reads, "The city shall grant the agency the authority to subpoena such documents and witnesses as may be
Shall.
necessary to carry out the agency functions identified in this agreement."
Okay.
So the settlement agreement calls for the agency to have subpoena power relevant to the
Good.
functions spelled out in the settlement agreement.
How would this
Thank you.
affect our, for example, we have not been able to follow up on a complaint from a civilian if the police officer has retired. If we had subpoena power, because he's no longer an APD person, he's not an employee. So if we had subpoena power, could we subpoena that person?
Chair, fine members of the board, I think that would require a pretty close read to determine where the jurisdiction of the agency stops. I mean,
Right.
I would have to look at that, because the question is, I've never had to answer, is setting aside the practical difficulties of investigating someone who's no longer with the department. I haven't been asked to parse out, or at least I don't recall sitting here right now, whether the jurisdiction extends to former employees.
Yeah, I'm just concerned because somebody complains to us and that person's retired, we can't answer their questions because we can't do an investigation.
Correct.
So it just popped into my head, I'm sorry.
So I think it would depend on if you were looking at it, maybe, if it was just to investigate the individual complaint, then that would be one question. If it was to investigate the issue in the context of looking at the department's overall performance, that could be a different question. So I don't think there's an easy
Answer to
easy
that.
to answer to how
Okay.
those two would interact.
All
I
right.
do think, though, that the basis for adding back in additional language beyond just in the context of an audit is well set out in the settlement agreement.
Well, and to get a subpoena, you have to make a case that says this is a legitimate request, right? To get a subpoena.
If it's challenged, then you'd end up in district court having to enforce it.
Right, okay. Do I hear a motion? Are we ready to discuss this more, or are we done?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes?
Yes.
All right.
Thank
Then
you.
also
A lot of
rela-
hard work there, thank you.
Yeah, it's been ongoing. Then, in the packet you had for Policy and Procedures Committee tonight, the rules and procedures for non-concurrence hearings is also in there. So we don't have to adopt this tonight, but, after all our conversations tonight, it might be worthwhile to make sure you read it, and then we can talk about it the next meeting.
Well, isn't this part and parcel of this?
Well, it is part and parcel, but it's not, this is our rules and regs
Our
of how
rules.
we're
I
going to
gotcha.
conduct
I
these
gotcha.
meetings. And, speaking to that point, one of the speakers tonight talked about the amount of time for public comment, and I think that's in our rules and procedures too, isn't it? And so I think we would not want to put that, for instance, in the ordinance, nor would we want to put the procedures for non-compliant, into
Okay.
our ordinance.
So this
But
goes into our rule book?
rules and procedures is where
Okay.
this would go. So please
So-
read it, and the next time we'll bring
I
it
have read
back
Okay.
for that. Okay, that's all.
Well, that was quite a lot. Thank you for all that work.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. The Case Review Subcommittee, Leonard is not here because he has strep and did not want to share. So he's not here tonight. And I should mention that Lisa Oric Martinez had a death in her family and is not here for that reason. So both of them are excused absences from this. The Case Review Subcommittee met and went over the cases that we passed at the consent agenda. I think that was all we did. I'm not sure we did anything else. Do you remember?
Chair Fine, there's the appeal.
Oh, and it's not on here, is it? Where is it? Oh, the appeals. Oh, I forgot about that. Do you want to present that?
Well, Chair Fine, this is the letter that the committee decided that they would not grant the appeal, but they directed the agency to issue a clarifying letter so that the opinion expressed in the letter is clarified as that of the officer and not of the CPOA investigator.
Okay, I do remember now. Thank you. I can't believe I forgot that. But, yeah, we felt like the letter could have been more clear to the person than what the letter she received. And we talked to the staff person, and we got clarification for ourselves and asked that the letter be rewritten, person be recontacted, and explain the part that was unclear to us. So, and staff member did that. Is that correct?
Chair Fine, we have not done that yet because the board has not ruled on it.
Okay, so we are not granting the appeal. And because we felt like there was not a reason to appeal, but there was a reason for clarification of the letter. And so that's what we decided to do instead. So there's, do you accept this appeal as I've explained it to you? That's my motion. Can I make a motion? Help me out here, guys. I'm tired.
I move that we accept
Thank you, God,
the
help you.
rewritten letter and the denial of the appeal.
Okay, thank you. Somebody second. Somebody second. Second? Okay, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, reports from city staff. APD. Hello, Lieutenant.
Chair Fine, honorable board members. Good evening. For the month of February, APD dispatch received 39,054 calls for service. Internal cases for that month, IA received 5. All of those were assigned to internal affairs for investigation. We had no cases administratively closed, no cases mediated. Total internal cases completed for the month of February were 8. 6 of those were completed by the internal affairs section, and 2 of those were completed by the area commands. Discipline imposed for those cases, 1 verbal reprimand and 3 letters of reprimand. The allegations involved in those cases involved 2-22, which is carrying and handling of firearms. We had 3 for conduct, 1 for employee absence, 1 for firearm discharge, 1 for canine unit responsibility, 1 for procedure, which involved handling of department property, 3 for use of force, and 2 for use of on-body recording device. We received 23 vehicle crashes. 16 of those are pending the crash review board. 4 of those have been closed and were determined to be preventable accidents. We distributed 15 early intervention system alerts, and pending cases for the month of February were 5. And I stand for any questions.
I have a question, and I discussed this briefly with Major Tyler. I think there's a big question here in the community about, with varying perceptions people have on how many outliers there are in the employee pool of officers. So there are some of us who believe that all police officers are outliers. They're all cowboys. They all do that. There are those of us who believe none of that is true. 100% of the officers are right on all the time. And most of us are somewhere in the middle. My question to the department is, what is your system for finding out which police officers are outliers to what you would have be the main frame of constitutional policing? People who are outside of that norm. How do you find them? I know the EIS system is one of them, but I noticed in Director Harness's report to the monitoring team, 2 of the officers that he found that were repeat frequent flyers, if you will, were not in the EIS system at all.
And so that is concerning, and I think it's something we need to understand as a board. We need to understand, how do you identify those people? What systems do you have in place? And how do you handle it once you find them? You know, every employee group has people that shouldn't be there in some number. So every company has a way to document that and to identify that and to get rid of those people. How do you do that at the Albuquerque Police Department? And Major Tyler said she would answer that.
Thank you, Chair Fine and members of the board. Part of the reform process has been adding additional layers of accountability within the department. And so there are multiple processes and mechanisms which supervisors now have as tools to use to help identify problem officers. So as you mentioned, EIS is one of those. We also added new software which allows the technology and record keeping to be at the sergeant's fingertips. And so now it's a matter of making sure that the sergeants are utilizing the information that's available to them to identify officers if there are those problem officers. We have an EIA Pro, which is a dashboard system which allows supervisors to look at information on a daily basis that tracks different mechanisms that would feed into the EIS system. Also, we have, I think, a lot better record keeping as far as tracking discipline on our officers that's available to the supervisors if they move through, if they move area commands at a bid. Now those supervisors have that information at their fingertips versus having to pull up an IA card or go visit IA. So all of those things have made that information more available to supervisors, which will help with that. Obviously, in some situations, it might be, okay, well, this person maybe has a misunderstanding of how to apply the policy, or maybe they misunderstood training that they received. So supervisors have different tools, whether it's retraining, discipline, progressive discipline, to try to correct behavior. Ultimately, as you guys are all aware, sometimes the department will go through progressive discipline to the point where there is termination on an employee. After that point, it's out of our hands as to what holds or if that termination holds. So we are working diligently on ensuring that we identify these officers if they do exist and when they do exist, and making sure that appropriate action is taken.
I have a question about that, because clearly we've all seen the newspaper. We know that it was a police officer who was fired, the department was forced to take back because of the personnel board. Now that's very confusing to me, because that is a political entity. Those are people named in a political way. So does that apply, first of all, does that apply to all city employees, that the personnel board has that ability?
I believe it does. Chair Fine, yes, I believe it does.
And do you see any reason why the police department should be separate from that rule? It seems to me that, the chief needs to be able to fire the people that are outliers, that should be out. And certainly not every city employee carries a gun. So, I would think that would be a different standard, but yet it's not. So why is that, and how does that work in other police departments?
Chair Fine and members of the board, in my previous experience, we did not have such entities. However, with the city, I believe it's one of those things that's a check, it serves as a check and balance. And obviously, all of the time, that doesn't work in the favor that maybe people want it to work in. So I know it's something that the city is looking at. I know that the chief stated very strongly that he didn't agree with the board's finding in that case, and we'll deal with those cases on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it's disquieting, I think, to members of the community who are concerned. A, how do you find them? And B, when you find them, do they really stay gone? How do you get them gone? And if not, I mean, the supposition is that the union keeps them you can't get rid of bad apples, and what's been your experience either at BCSO or here in terms of the ability to get rid of bad apples?
I'm confident that, our Chair Fine and members of the board, I'm confident that internally, if a bad apple, so to speak, is identified, that the chief will take appropriate action and the city will support us in such action. Obviously, we are much more concerned with quality versus quantity, and we only want good officers to be out there serving our community.
Okay. I'd be interested in any report, to include in your reports anything that would help us understand that. In particular, I want to bring back the point of Director Harness's piece that he submitted to the Monitor. That said there were 2 officers who were repeat offenders and were not in the EIS system and obviously are still on the force. So when we see stuff like that, what should happen? What got missed? What happened?
Chair Fine and members of the board, at that time, we were going through obviously a lot of changes with the policy, how things were being reported. That's one reason why we're so concerned with making sure that we can get to a point with use of force cases and serious use of force cases and internal affairs cases that timelines are being met sufficiently, because we want to make sure that we are identifying those issues in a timely fashion. And so I think we are doing a much better job of that now, and we're continually working to improve that.
So the sergeants, what's the obligation on the part of the sergeants who are looking at this dashboard of their officers? And, you know, the hierarchy, is there, what happens with them? How do you know as a major that that's being followed, he's not just ignoring it?
Chair Fine and members of the board, the obligation of sergeants is to be looking at that information on a regular basis. I don't believe it's defined much more than regular basis in the policy as far as the dashboard information that's available to them. Now, if there is an EIS alert, they do have a time frame which the whole chain of command is alerted or is notified of that alert, and everybody in the chain of command is made aware that that person had an alert, to make sure that they're looking at whatever actions triggered those alerts and that the officer is not in need of any training or further action.
It's, I think, really a key ingredient in mending the relationship between the police department and the community.
Absolutely.
And so I would be open to any progress you make in that area that we should know about, because I do think it's really vital to our success together. So thank you.
Chair Fine and members of the board, we will keep you updated on that.
Okay, thank you.
We do have the presentation that we were asked to give to you as
Oh, yeah.
far as the agency status report. So let me just see if I can get this up on the screen.
Madam Chair, after that, I have a question. The Major?
Major Tyler?
Yes, Chair Fine and Board Member Arvino.
In regards to the EIS, I finally got it. I wrote it down 3 times here. So a person, an officer is identified. It comes to the EIS. Then the sergeant is the one who counsels that person. And is that done daily? Is that they do it every month? Is there a report that's generated?
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, yes, when a EIS alert is generated, it is filtered down to the sergeant through the chain of command. And the sergeant has to sit down with that officer, review the items that generated the alert, and then do a report up the chain of command as to whether any further action is required. So oftentimes you might just have a combination of incidents that don't require further action. But whether action is required or action is not required, that sergeant is tasked with doing a report to the chain of command, and the commanders provide that back to internal affairs for record keeping. It is important to note that the EIS system, or the early intervention system, is not a disciplinary system. It is merely an information sharing system to better inform supervisors so that they can be aware of their employees' behavior. It's to help improve performance and identify issues early before misconduct occurs. So that is the main principle for the early intervention system.
And there's the potential for one situation with an officer involved that could shoot up 4 or 5 different EIS reports on that one officer for one incident?
So one incident in itself won't generate multiple things for an officer, but, well, I guess it could. If they say, for example, we're in an officer-involved shooting, that separate incident would trigger one, as well as once the administrative investigation is opened on it, that would be a separate incident. So there are some times where one incident or one action could generate multiple different triggers within the system. And that's why they have to be closely reviewed, both internally by internal affairs before they send them out, and by the supervisor, to make sure that it is an actual pattern. We're looking for a pattern of behavior that might be concerning.
Right.
Are there any other questions for Major Tyler before she goes on to her report? Did you want to?
I was going to do this presentation, but
Yeah.
we're having some technical difficulties, so.
If you get this to work, it'll be the first time I've ever seen it work. I'm impressed already. Look at this. a blue screen. No, it'll come back. She'll get it.
I can give the presentation verbally if you guys would like. Is that fine?
Sure.
So this presentation is a presentation that we have been giving around the city to our CPCs. Yay!
Wow. Wow. It was right there. There it is. There it is.
Okay. So I won't touch it, but you're going to be on one screen or one slide for the entire presentation. We'll find a way to click through it. So this is the presentation that we are presenting around the city to update our community on the progress that has been made through this point of the settlement agreement. So the first slide is a statement from Chief Eden. We were receiving a lot of questions with the change of administration at the federal level and then also here locally with the U.S. Attorney's Office as to if there was changes that came down from the federal level, would we still be committed to the reforms within the CASA? And so Chief Eden put out a statement saying that he has maintained that regardless of what or if any changes may occur on the national level, APD is committed to our reform efforts and the successful implementation of our settlement agreement. The settlement agreement is an agreement with the people that we proudly serve. Our team will continue with the reforms and the substantial progress we have made. We believe that the changes have improved our training, our responses, our accountability, and our unwavering collaboration with our community to fulfill the terms of our agreement. So we stand fast that regardless of what happens at the national level, we're going to continue with the reforms. We think we're making great progress and that we're seeing valuable change for the citizens that we serve. So the reporting period that this progress report covers is from August of 2016 to January of 2017. This is always a little bit difficult of a concept, I think, for our community to understand because the reporting is delayed. So we're giving you our progress report now. The monitor won't provide their report until, it won't be available till May. So we always have to take a pause to realize that the information is a little bit in hindsight and isn't always an accurate reflection of where we stand today. But during this reporting period, we met all of the CASA deadlines for policies and for training. We're now in the operational phase of the settlement agreement, and the 37 new policies that were approved are currently being reviewed. So our whole use of force policy suite is now under the 6-month review and is being very close to being finalized. All CASA-related training is now completed, the first iteration of that training. Obviously, all of those training components, or most of them, have annual retraining requirements. And we're working to implement job aids and add new technology to assist with the reform process where applicable. During this reporting period, we really focused on bringing accountability to the officer's application or uses of force. So with our use of force, we had the policy, training, and reporting improvements. The policy, like I stated, the use of force policy suite is now in the 6-month review process and is close to being approved by the parties. We did have a supplementary use of force class specifically for supervisors in December that helped supervisors recognize and address the monitor's concerns with areas of show of force and serious use of force and making sure that our supervisors are making the correct designation for force. Also making sure that we had the ability with technology to track show of force for electronic control weapons or the tasers. Use of force reviews are now being completed with our Blue Team, which is our new technology. It's a feeder system into IA Pro. All of the chain of command review for use of force reports now occurs through this system. They can, supervisors can catch investigative deficiencies. They can make sure that all relevant videos and reports are attached. They can attach additional concern memos within that same system and also have their employee work plans there. So that's another mechanism that's used by the supervisors on a daily basis or on a regular basis to help identify any issues if there are some with their subordinates. Like I stated, we had the implementation of job aids throughout the chain of command to make sure that those investigations are more complete, thorough, and consistent throughout the department. We also added a line inspection form, which is at the bottom of the screen that you can't see because it's cut off. But that is for the supervisors to make sure that they're doing routine checks of equipment, cameras, and uniform for their personnel, and that we have a good mechanism to track that and record that data. Additional training that was conducted during this period was more supervisor training on the Six Sigma process that was held in December. That has a continuing component where we're actually partnering with our community leaders, that they're coming in and providing coaching to the people that volunteered to continue in that process, and it is about identifying issues and creating better process or doing process improvement to eliminate errors or inefficiencies within our department. We conducted the misconduct complaint intake and investigations. During this time as well, our field training officer program continues to operate. Upon completion of the academy, our recruit officers complete 16 weeks of training with 4 different officers. They have to work different shifts in different area commands to make sure that they're familiar with different areas of our city. Also, they get, the FTOs have training in management and supervision, constitutional and community-oriented policing, and effective problem-solving techniques. Our FTOs, when they're actually out on the FTO program, are graded on making sure that they're meeting APD core values. We were able to change our system to actually put a component on their daily observation report that ensures that their training officer and that recruit officer are discussing what those core values are, so that that's reiterated on a continual basis with our officers, with our new officers. In October of 2016, for the first time at our academy, we held a cultural diversity panel. This was based off of some of the feedback from the monitoring team on wanting to expand the amount of cultural diversity training that we had done initially in 2016. So we started this with our new cadets. We had stakeholders from the community. I worked with a community partner who helped identify community leaders within 4 different components of our community. So we had representatives from our Asian community, our Native American community, our African American community, and our Hispanic community. They came in and they did presentations to the cadets on the historical context of why there might be mistrust within their communities with law enforcement or government in general. And it was really eye-opening because it gave the cadets the perspective as to an understanding of why might there be that mistrust. They also were able to have a question and answer discussion with the cadets, and it was a huge success. We just did it for the second time, actually, just several weeks ago. We're continuing to work on diversifying the training even more, including more training on our transgender community, and also including training for our hard of hearing and deaf community. We're also looking at expanding this training even further to include not just ethnic groups, but also additional religious or minority groups.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Chair Moore?
And is part of their training elsewhere or in here about interacting with people with mental health issues or homeless, or
Yes,
is that
Chair
included?
Fine and members of the board, I'll get to the crisis intervention training here momentarily. So it's coming up right now.
No, there you go.
Focusing on our mental health community, our crisis intervention training is 40 hours. The recruit officers receive that once they're completed with their training. They become actual officers. That way they have some actual field experience to apply to it. They come back to the academy and receive 40 hours of training. We also have our crisis intervention unit, our crisis outreach and support team, which is referred to as COAST. Our new mobile crisis teams, and also the newest addition is our enhanced crisis intervention team, which you can't see at the bottom of the screen. The enhanced crisis intervention team, they are volunteers who have either a knack or a passion for serving people in crisis or mental illness, and they actually get an additional 8 hours of training in addition to the other training that they've already received. And we're working towards our goal of having 40% of the field officers trained in the ECITs to have that additional training. Continuing on with the mental health, our Independent Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, or MRAC, they provide guidance to the city and the department. There's members from all walks of life, including providers, police, the court system, advocates, family members, and consumers. They help review policy, training, outcomes, and also just have very good discussions about things. So that group meets quite frequently, and although it was a difficult thing to get off the ground, I think they're much more organized now, and I hear a lot of good things coming from MRAC. So looking back at some of our data from 2016, I know you guys it might be hard to read the words on the graph, but this is CIT-related reports or calls for service from January to October of 2016. During that time frame, we had 2,064 CIT-related reports. Out of those, this is a graph showing the big red portion shows that those patients were taken to the hospital. So that shows the jail diversion program, that they're actually getting taken to the hospital for services and not going to jail. 9% or 9.16%, which is the brown area shaded, is where they didn't have any transport at all. So they were able to resolve the situation there at scene. There wasn't an arrest made, or they didn't need to be transported to the hospital. The green portion was or that the reports are in process. So again, they were probably referred to our crisis intervention team for further resources or to keep an eye on them. Maybe it was a one-time thing, and we'll just keep their information on hand so that if we deal with them in the future, we'll have some background information on them. 2.76%, the light blue area, is the percentage of those crisis calls that involve suicidal subjects. And the dark blue is the actual arrests that were made, which was 1.65%, I believe. And then 0.15% had other types of services provided. So as you can see, a very small percentage of the calls that have to do with people in crisis end up with an arrest.
Quick question. In regards to the mental health, the crisis intervention, are there clinicians, actual mental health clinicians that staff that or are in that?
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, there are for our COAST team and also for our mental health crisis teams, our mobile crisis teams, they will be staffed with mental health clinicians.
Each time they go out?
Yes, but officers are not always partnered with a clinician. So it's only if there's a response from the mobile health crisis team or COAST has clinicians with it. If it's a normal crisis call, there's not going to be a clinician there on all of those calls.
Okay, thank you.
Albuquerque Police Department is the first department I ever heard of that had a psychiatrist on retainer. So that's first time ever I've ever heard of that. Oh, he is indeed.
Out of the 2,064 crisis-related reports or calls for service between January and October, only 6 of those resulted in some type of force used. So that turns out to be a fraction of 1%. So I think that's a really remarkable number because it's a much smaller percent than I think anybody probably believed was occurring. And so now that we are tracking this data, we are able to see that, in fact, out of all of those calls, only 6 of them resulted in having to use some type of force.
And what percentage of those would be SWAT cases? I mean, I know there's been a dramatic decrease in any kind of force with the SWAT, that they've been very successful in reducing the incidences of force. So what percentage of that overall thing would have been SWAT?
Chair Fine and members of the board, I don't believe that the SWAT activations were broken out of that, so I would have to get that data for you separately. I could be happy to bring that to you next time. I know that the amount of SWAT activations that resulted in any type of force was a very small number during 2016, and out of those I would have to look to see how many of them were involving somebody in crisis or with mental health.
I'd be curious to know how many of the officer-involved shootings were SWAT-related in the first place. But certainly there's been a dramatic improvement in that, in the tools they use to create nonviolent resolution. It's amazing.
Chair Fine and members of the board, moving on to staffing. We increased our graduation rate from the academy by more than 400% from 2010 to 2016. In 2016, we were able to either hire or graduate 93 recruits, which was the highest number in more than a decade. Staffing plan was published in June of 2016. The police and community together teams, our PAC teams, are being built up as we speak in the different area commands. Those are comprised of a lieutenant, a sergeant, and detectives. Our current numbers of sworn personnel, again, it's cut off at the bottom, but we have 844 total sworn. Again, we're allotted for 1,000. Out of that 844, more than half of those, 488, are assigned to field services. That number of 488 does include our sergeants and our lieutenants.
On the PAC teams, I've just read about that in the journal. What is that? What do they do?
Chair Fine and members of the board, the PAC teams are designed to build partnerships within the community, have good communication within the specific area commands, and they have to actually give a commitment to stay in that specific area command so that they can learn about that community, know exactly what issues that specific area command is having, so that it's more of a partnership with solving the problems within that area command with the community partners.
How is it different from the CPCs?
These are sworn officers that are in the area command, so that is their actual function as a sworn officer, is to problem solve with the community to reduce crime in their specific area.
I read police and community together, meaning sworn and regular citizens. That's what I was reading. So that's not what you mean?
No, Chair Fine and members of the board, it is the sworn's responsibility to partner and build those bridges with their community to identify what problems that community members are having.
Okay,
businesses in their community or neighborhood associations, things of that nature.
I have a question about that. Does then this officer do regular shifts, or is this sort of a new type of physician?
Chair Fine and Board Member Brown, it is a new position. They are assigned to work in that area command, so they can adjust their shifts to be able to do things like attend community meetings at night. It's going to be mostly a day shift position, but again, they will be expected to work when they're needed. So if there's a community meeting, a neighborhood association meeting, or a church that needs to meet with them, they have to make sure that they're available to build those partnerships with the community.
Okay, thank you.
Continuing with staffing and our promotional process, you guys talked about the policy already a little bit tonight, but in July of 2016, we worked to get our ratio of supervisors to officers down. So we now have just 8 officers to every 1 sergeant. The chief has set a goal, which is that 8-to-1 ratio is required by the CASA. We are actually working towards trying to decrease that even more to a 6-to-1 ratio. Promotional process was revamped to ensure promotions are based on the knowledge, skills, and ability required to perform supervisory duties, and with the emphasis on effective constitutional and community-oriented policing. Our community policing councils, they were established by the mayor prior to the CASA. Obviously, they were also written into the CASA. They are independent of the city and APD. Their goals is to help improve our goals are to help improve in communication between community and APD, and they create actionable recommendations that are sent directly to the chief. They can address any type of community concerns, review policy and law enforcement profiles, our priorities, define and further community policing, and they are the civilian component to gain insight and to provide us information back to APD. Again, they're completely independent, and they do have their own website, which can be found on the city's website. It's under cabq.gov/police/community policing council. Anyone can go online and review their minutes and also their recommendations in their annual reports. As far as community engagement and outreach, our internal strategy for community outreach involves a lot of social media because that's how a lot of people today communicate. For Facebook, we have over 24,000 followers, or we had 24,000 followers in April of 2015. As of February of this year, we had over 40,000 followers. For Twitter, we increased our followers from 20,000 in April of 2015 to 56,000 in February of 2017. They've also started a couple new initiatives, which include Tweet from the Beat, where it's basically like a virtual ride-along. So they will tweet out different things during the shift to help citizens understand what it's like to be a police officer for a day. They've also started the Tuesday Cop Talk, where people can ask any question they want of the agency and we'll respond to them. Our data shows that the department reaches more than 1 million people each month through social media. We continue to do the Coffee with the Cops. You can't see this again on the bottom of the slide. And we're also working on developing a mobile application that will help increase the ease of service that we can provide to our citizens. So the next thing is like I said, this reporting period was covered from August of 2016 to January of 2017. The next monitor's report, as I stated, will be released on May 2nd. And you can read any of the reports, including the information that was taken out of this presentation for our agency update on the city website under documents related to APD settlement agreement. And I stand for questions. I promised Director Harness I would go quickly because he's seen a few of these already.
I have two.
Questions. We caused you longer.
I have two.
Okay.
Can you go back to the first slide?
That's a hard question.
I don't see the CPOA. I don't see the POB in there.
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, this first slide is actually just a statement from the chief in relation to questions we were receiving from the media about continuing the reform process.
Okay, that's my first question. My second question is the same. I don't see us anywhere in there. Part of our outreach committee, you're talking about this as the presentation to the city people, the citizens for outreach. It will be tremendously helpful to have the CPOA, not only helpful, it should be respected as such, to have the CPOA and the POB in this presentation.
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, your point's very well taken, and I appreciate your perspective on that, and I agree with you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Fine and members of the board.
Mr. Moya.
Chair Fine, members of the board. At the last city council meeting, they approved the reappointments of Chair Fine and Board Member Ring. We are still working on the appointment to fill the vacancy on the board. We have had some delays, but we're going to have that appointment communication introduced at the next city council meeting. We apologize for the delay, but we are working to get that vacancy filled. And with that, I stand for any questions.
I didn't understand. I'm sorry, I didn't.
We have a vacancy because of Beth leaving.
Right.
So he's talking about the city council hasn't gotten a chance to pick the person that will replace Beth.
But you have someone in mind already?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown. Yeah, last summer when we opened the application process again, we have a list of about 48 people that applied and met the minimum qualifications. So we are currently looking at the folks on that list to get somebody appointed.
But you haven't selected one yet to present to the council?
Chair Moore, Board Member Fine, not yet. We're looking to have that because it's a communication that comes from staff to City Council. We're going to have that communication introduced at the next council meeting.
That's a lot of months because, yeah, we knew that chairperson, I'm sorry. We knew that Chair Moore was leaving. Is there any way to get ahead of the game in the future? It seems like a very long time to me.
Chair Moore, I'm sorry, Chair Fine, Board Member Brown. Yeah, we apologize for the delay. The thing that we have to, by ordinance, do is look at all the different demographics of the city and make sure that it's all balanced by geographic, gender, ethnic diversity, and sometimes those pieces don't quite fit perfectly. And so we, as like the selection committee, have to have some conversations about how we're going to address and answer all of those qualifications that we're required to by ordinance. And sometimes when we ask candidates if they are still interested, sometimes they say no. And then we kind of have to come back to the drawing board and look back at all those requirements and look back at the list that we have and make sure that we are appointing candidates that fit well in all those categories.
Okay, thank you.
It's hard to know who to line up, in the batting cage, the warm-up spot, because they don't know who's leaving. So if they have to balance all the things he's talking about,
But they knew
can't
that,
do it in advance.
but they've known that Chairperson Moore was leaving, for
Oh, I
example.
know, I'm
That's my
just saying
point.
that, can we get ahead of the game?
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, but I'm saying you can't because you don't know who's leaving next. I understand what you're saying, but I also understand what he's saying. I am a middle child, is the way it is.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay. Is that all, sir? Does anybody have any questions for Julian? City Attorney's Office?
Chair Fine and members of the board, I had only a couple of points to address some of the things that we had discussed earlier or that had come up earlier. One is that I did check on the timing of the promotional policy. The city's resolution draft is due next Wednesday, March 22nd. So that is when we will send it to the other parties, the DOJ, the APOA, and also the monitor. And that would start the 15-day period for the monitor's comments. So if you do have suggestions, I would request that they come as quickly as possible. If there is time, we could try to address some of them before the 22nd. If there is not time before the 22nd, there is the possibility that we could try to work with them during the monitor's 15 days. It gets a little more challenging during those 15 days because then there are just overlapping issues instead of just letting him resolve what is presented to him.
So should the comments go to you or to whom? Who in the city then, if it's not you?
I would, Samantha Holtz is the
Okay.
assistant city attorney that is taking the lead on this and has been in the meetings with the APOA. I would suggest also copying Jenica Jacoby
Thank you.
and me as well. That would be helpful, and we'll see what we can do to address those. The other item I was going to mention is that I know that an email went out, I believe last week, to the board inviting you to set up meetings on March 20, I believe the 30th or the 31st. The parties have set up times or blocked off times to meet with various groups and stakeholders to address any concerns or issues that any of those groups want to address, the way that we did before the last hearing. The next hearing is scheduled for May 8th, as you know, and so we would like to meet with amici groups and stakeholders like the board before then. And I believe that the 30th and 31st of March is when we had blocked off time to suggest to have those meetings if there is a time that works for the board.
And today's the 16th, so I will amend the 2 weeks I gave you to get your comments about what we should bring up, because we need it for that meeting. So you have now a week from today to get me that stuff. So I can talk to Ed about it, and we can get ready for that meeting. We will be there.
Okay, excellent. That is all.
Thank you very
From the
much.
city attorney's office, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harness.
Chair Fine, fellow board members. Excuse me. In my last report, I neglected to report on the cert cases that had been before the Force Review Board in the month of January. There were 5 cases, and of those 5 cases, there were 2 that I had concerns with. One was actually a concurrence that the case was going to be referred to Internal Affairs for an investigation. And the second was concerns regarding the detective for an extended period of time not uploading his video properly so that it was accessible. The fact that the detective used a Garrity statement in his police reports. The fact that the officer hand wrote in a charge on his charging documents. And I also had concerns that there was an officer that wasn't interviewed as a part of the investigation. And I had some overall concerns about the veracity of the officer in this case. The officer stated that he used force because he saw a syringe in the subject's hand, yet when the other officers arrived on scene to help him, he didn't warn them of any syringe. After the subject was handcuffed, he simply got up and wanted to go chase other bad guys. The Force Review Board decided that this case, in fact, warranted further investigation, so that's the process that was undertaken for that case as well. As far as other Force Review Boards, there were 2 Force Review Boards conducted for use of force cases that were randomly selected. There were 10 cases, and it took us 2 meetings to go through those. The first meeting occurred on the 2nd of March, and the second meeting occurred on the 15th of March. There weren't any cases that had any major issues. There were some minor issues that were referred back to either the command or the investigator to follow up and memorialize that follow-up in a memo that would be part of the use of force file. But there was nothing that would result in any sort of a policy change or anything else as a result of these randomly selected use of force cases for the quarter. This was a quarterly review. I also attended the Force Review Board for the tactical section. That was on the 8th of March, and that reviewed all of the SWAT activations for the month of February. There were 6 activations for the month of February. In these activations, there were no shots fired as far as officers utilizing their firearm. There were chemical munitions used, and there were deployments of their robot and their other mechanical apparatus. There was 1 use of force generated from this, from these 6 activations. And that use of force was found to be in policy. For the month of January, we received 30 complaints. For the month of February, we received 36 complaints. For the month of January and February, we received 11 job well dones in both months, so that's 22. Today I had a meeting with District Attorney Torres this morning. I thought it was a very useful meeting. We discussed his involvement with the force investigation team from APD and their office's involvement on a weekly basis with ongoing issues with APD. He requested that, if possible, that he needed some sort of data research done, that he might be able to avail our resources to do that kind of work. But a couple of concrete things came from the meeting. He requested that his office be CC'd on any criminal referral that we make to APD. He also requested that we take a closer look at the cert cases to make sure that there isn't any use of force there that might rise to the level of criminality. And if so, he requested that we contact him directly so that his office can monitor that investigation. Overall, I think it was a good meeting, and I'm sure that we're going to continue to maintain contact. He did express, as was already relayed to you regarding the officer-involved shootings, that he has hired 2 attorneys to do full-time work on officer-involved shootings. And he's going to have those attorneys make those charging decisions on cases that are less complex. If cases are more complex, he's going to use an independent panel of district attorneys to make the charging decisions. And that's how he's going to go about handling the officer-involved shootings. As you know, Miriam Verplu's last day was the 10th of March. As of today, the position has been posted, and it will be posted until the 29th of March for applicants for the position. We will be bringing the Daigle Law Group to Albuquerque to do IA certification training. That's a cooperative effort between ourselves and the Internal Affairs Division. That training is tentatively scheduled for the 16th of October through the 20th. We will need to make sure that we have a minimum of 25 participants. APD has assured me that we won't have any problems filling those seats. However, if we do run short, or if we can go all the way up to 50, we would reach out to other departments in the Southwest to come and attend this training. I think that the trainer's a valuable resource. It's a relatively inexpensive training session. He only charges per attendee. He doesn't charge for his team or anything else, expenses. He has it all rolled into the training expense itself. So we're going to be having that training. So most likely, we won't have a full agency that goes to NACOL this year, because all of us will be going to that.
And that's here in
that
Albuquerque.
training. Yes, the Daigle Law Group training will be here in Albuquerque.
And are we paying for that then?
We will, Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, we will only pay for those that attend.
Your staff that attend.
Right. We don't have to pay to have him come in, or
Oh,
we don't.
okay.
Yeah, all we have to do is pay for those who attend.
And APD pays for their members?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
And we actually will, with a minimum number of attendees, we'll actually get a couple of free seats.
Good.
I did respond to the officer-involved shooting on the 10th of February. And then on the 6th of March, I did respond to what was then categorized as a possible in-custody death, which it turns out that the person is going to survive and go home, so that will no longer be treated as an in-custody death. And other than that, I stand for questions.
I have one concern, and you and I and Major Tyler and Commander McCrae have talked about this, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with cases that you're getting, but these 5 cases came through. The unfortunate part is, though you reviewed them, they did. This group, this body, the board, represents the community, and we did not review those 5 cases. So I have a problem with that. I understand the circumstances. I understand that we're trying to address those circumstances moving forward to try to get it, and that's why their efforts to make sure we can access the evidence is so important. But there's no excuse, in my opinion, for us as a board to see any cases passed on
that we should review that we don't review. So I just want to say that I appreciate the hamstrung situation that you were in, but we need to avoid those at all costs, and I wouldn't like to see that happen again. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Well, you might have something to say.
Well, Chair Fine, I think that given the new access to information through the Safe Link, that should help facilitate some of these issues. And Major Tyler's commitment that once the cert case is closed and ready for a review board, it'll be made available, so we should have those days. I haven't received a cert case, so we'll see. We'll have our first test as soon as one comes across.
Well, and Commander McCrae and Chris, what was his name? Chris?
Wiggum?
Yeah, Wiggum want to do another training for us. We did a brief one before this meeting, but we will do another one, and so we're ready when the time comes. So we should set that soon. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Director Harness? No? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we did, the other business that we have, the last business, we already did the ordinance amendments. So if those are included in our passing that, right? On item 14, other business, ordinance amendments. Try to say that 10 times fast. I think we already covered that with passing the ordinance amendments before, correct? Yep. But this whole piece, isn't this whole piece something that we have to pass because we had a problem with notification of the last meeting? And so we got a request from Mr. Arasim to re-put this on the agenda, and so we have to pass these. Can we do that in a single motion, Mr. Baker?
Chair, fine, members of the board, what I'd recommend is going through each item individually and summarizing what occurred during the last meeting.
Okay.
The context of this is that there was an Open Meetings Act complaint raised with us, and the suggestion was made to just revisit it at the next board meeting. The board accepted that, and therefore it's on the agenda for tonight. But by going through each item, and I know Director Harness can assist. I wasn't here, so I'm not much help for summarizing, but if you take each item, summarize, vote on the ones that were action items again, that will reaffirm the board's action.
Okay, item A, the ordinance amendments. We had some discussion about that, but we didn't vote on anything relative to that. We completed that discussion tonight and did vote on them. So that was that item A. Can I say that, explain these things as I go down, and then we vote on them all as once?
I would vote individually, item by item.
Okay.
Chair
Can I get a
Moore,
motion
Commissioner
that we accept?
I move that we accept item A as explained by the chair.
Second.
Somebody second.
I second.
Oh, okay. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Election of the vice chair. There was, well, shall we do it over, or shall we just discuss it?
We just discussed it.
We just discuss it, right?
Chair, fine, I would discuss what occurred at the last meeting, reopen it for a vote, reaffirm the vote.
Okay, I gotcha. So at the last meeting, we discussed Dr. Garcia being vice chair. She was nominated and elected, but because of the way the notification problem with that meeting, I am asking for a motion to do the same.
I motion that we go ahead.
In a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Approval of the January 12th, 2017 minutes.
I move that we approve the January 12 minutes.
Second?
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
The consent agenda, we discussed the report from the Case Review Committee in which all the administratively closed cases listed here were discussed and approved. Can I get a motion to approve them again?
I move that we approve all the administratively closed cases presented at the last meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Cases investigated, we investigated these 3 cases. The Case Review Committee suggested that the board approve those letters as written. Can I get a motion?
I motion that we pass the cases investigated from the last meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Officer-involved shooting. At the last meeting, we discussed case I-001-15, and that was passed as written, and I would like a motion to that effect. You want to talk about it, Mr. Harness?
Chair Fine, if you would prefer, certainly. Just as a reminder, this was an officer-involved shooting where the officer was exonerated for the use of force. The subject was approaching the officer with the beanbag rifle with a raised hammer. And we exonerated the officer's use of deadly force in that case.
May I have a motion?
Yes, I move that we accept the letter that was written on on the officer-involved shooting from the last meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Commendation for Lieutenant S. arising out of OIS I-3715. That was a discussion about how appreciative we were of Officer S.'s clarity and command of the situation and the extra care he took with the family. We thought he did an exceptional job, and we asked that the staff send a commendation to him on our behalf.
I move that we move forward with a commendation for Lieutenant S.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Summary of other comments and proposals. I don't know what that is. Do you?
I just have one last thing. I'm sorry. It's going to be real quick. Major Tyler, the presentation that you made, if the board could get a hard copy of that, we'd appreciate it. It's on the website, right?
Chair Fine and members of the board, I will ensure that I email you all a copy of it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
I move that we pass any summary or other comments or proposals that may have been provided last meeting.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Unless there's any other business to come before this board, I accept a motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn.
I second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience for this very long agenda. I am grateful to you all.